Missing Florence. The Amish Bonnet Sisters, Book 7. Written by Samantha Price. Narrated by Stephanie Dillard. Chapter 1. Florence placed the framed photo on the mantel over the fireplace and then stepped back to admire it. It was comforting to have this tiny piece of the mother she barely remembered. In the fading, late afternoon light in the living room of the little cottage she shared with her husband, she moved closer to examine every feature of her mother's face. The full lips, just like her own, were curved upward. But was that sadness in those eyes? Oh, Eleanor, if only you could talk to me. And who had taken the photo? Florence had learned her mother had a rocky time when she was a teenager, and from what she'd learned from Betty, Eleanor probably hadn't been happy until she met Dot. Betty, the biological grandmother she'd just met, seemed nice, so part of her mother's childhood must have been good, before it fell apart. How funny life is. If her mother's life hadn't taken a turn for the worse, causing her to run away, she probably would have never met Florence's father and never joined the Amish community. It was all meant to be, right from the start. God's will. Florence had to believe that he was in charge and that he had a plan. Death was so final. All their lives had changed so drastically when her father had left them to go home to God. He had been a calming and sensible presence in their lives. Her half-sisters had been so well behaved back then. Just one look from their father was enough to make them pause and think about their words and their actions. It gave her a sense of contentment knowing that her parents had been very much in love. They had to have been if her mother had joined the community to be with him. He would have been the calming and grounded influence she so needed, given her tumultuous past. On the drive home from seeing her grandmother hours before, she'd called Earl at his place of work and told him she'd met Betty. Then Carter had driven her to Mark's house, and she told him about meeting their grandmother and showed him the photographs of their mother. His memories, too, would have been hazy. Even though her two older brothers hadn't seemed curious about their mother, they certainly were interested to learn everything she'd found out. Since Earl lived in Ohio, he said he'd see the photos of their mother when he came over in December for their half-sister Joy's wedding. Would she be welcome at Joy's wedding? She couldn't go unless someone from the family invited her. If Joy or one of the girls asked her to go, she would still have to be sure that Wilma, her stepmother, agreed to having her there. Of course, if she did go to the wedding, it would be awkward seeing the bishop and the oversight there, given that she'd left to marry Carter with no word to them, or anyone. But she'd never officially joined the community. She had taken no instructions and had no baptism. Carter walked up behind her, causing her to jump. "Ah, it looks good there." "It does, doesn't it?" she said, smiling at her mother's image and then her husband. He nodded. "Why don't you take Spot for a walk and I'll start on the dinner?" "Okay, come on, Spot." Spot jumped off the couch as soon as Florence took the leash off the peg by the door. Carter had taken up cooking, and he knew how Florence liked to wander around their property in the evening, just as she once walked around her apple orchard next door. Once she had fastened the leash to Spot's collar, she pulled on her coat, scarf, and hat to keep out the cold. Then she clipped Spot's dark blue dog coat on him, fastening the buckle at the front. Being a short-haired dog, he felt the cold. There wasn't much daylight left, and the cool wind had picked up and swept about them. Florence didn't mind the cooler weather. In winter, when the freezing weather was nearly unbearable, she always reminded herself that the apple trees needed a good cold snap to produce the best fruit. Even though she could no longer walk through rows of apple trees, she walked over the property she and Carter owned, visualizing what it would be like once their own trees were planted into rows. When the trees matured, their beautiful blooms would fill the air with fragrance. The ground had already been tested, and now drainage had to be dug. Sadly, nothing would happen in the orchard for a couple of years, since proper and extensive preparation was essential to having healthy and productive trees. That made it all the more gut-wrenching to see the mature apple trees in Wilma's orchard next door, the orchard that would always be her father's. If she'd had her own baby trees, she could have concentrated on them. But she didn't. And it made that annoyance over Wilma's attitude toward her gnaw at her heart. She knew that even the bishop would have been fine with her managing the orchard. If he wasn't, she would have accepted that. But Wilma never even bothered to ask, pushing her aside at the first opportunity. And it was a slap across her face to have Wilma put Levi in charge of the orchard, since he knew nothing about running an orchard, and probably even less than nothing about running a business. Pulling her thoughts back to her own land, she consoled herself by concentrating on the fact that her relationship with Carter would grow along with their trees once they were planted. And, if God willed it, they'd soon have a family of their own. She looked up at the rapidly darkening sky and wondered what Wilma and the girls were doing right now. Did they miss her? Were they coping without her? Looking back at Wilma's orchard, she had a funny feeling deep down that it would be hers again one day. God would hear her prayers. Meanwhile, next door at the Baker home, it's not too late to change things and have them on the same day. Joy was tired of having this same conversation with her mother. They'd talked about it nearly every day for the past seemingly endless weeks. Even though Joy didn't like arguing in front of Isaac, she had to have things her way since it was her wedding, one of the most important days of her life. I know it would be more practical to have both weddings on the same day, but don't you see that as a young girl— Joy stopped and inhaled deeply, reminding herself to talk calmly. As a young woman, I want to have a wedding where it's just me and Isaac getting married, okay? You're being selfish. Don't you understand we're not made of money? Those are apples growing on the trees outside, not big wads of cash. There's nothing growing on the trees at the moment, Favor blurted out. Mom glared at her and then stood up from the dinner table to pass Isaac more of the thinly sliced roast beef. You don't mind, do you, Isaac? I don't mind when or where I marry Joy, as long as I do. He smiled across at Joy, as though he was saying the right thing, and then his face lit up further when he looked down at all the meat Mom was piling onto his plate. Once she was done, she sat back down and passed him the jug of gravy. Joy wanted to scream. Her mother was working on her husband-to-be through his stomach, and Isaac loved his food. Didn't he see what Mom was doing? "Danke, Wilma," Isaac said. Wilma was making an extra effort to be nice. "Would you like me to pour it?" "Okay." "Say when. Have as much as you like, Isaac." Mom's voice dripped with honey sweetness. "When?" said Isaac, still grinning. Wilma chortled and then placed the gravy jug back on the table without asking whether anyone else wanted any. Inside, Joy wanted to scream like Cherish often did, then storm away from the table. She exerted all the self-control she could muster. It's already been decided anyway, so what good is there talking about it? The dates have been arranged. You and Levi are getting married on the 15th, and I'm getting married days before that. When you marry Levi, do we have to call him Dot? Asked Favor. Of course not, stupid. Is he your father? Cherish asked, in a voice full of sarcasm. Then she added, call him Mr. Brunner. Cherish covered her mouth and giggled. Mom ignored her two youngest daughters and spoke to Joy. We're a few months out, and the dates can easily be changed before we let all our friends know. You just heard Isaac say he doesn't mind. The wedding day will not be as good as you're probably imagining it to be. It's just one day, and then it's over, and then you have the rest of your life to be a fraud to Isaac. The day will fade into a memory. Yeah, Mom, A memory she wants to recall, said Hope, who was obviously trying to help out her older sister. Joy gave a grateful nod to Hope. Danke, Hope. See, even she understands. While Mom glared at Hope, Isaac said, "We could consider what your mother is saying, Joy. It's an expensive day, and the two rolled into one will halve the cost." Joy couldn't believe her ears. The very person who should have been backing her the strongest had betrayed her. "It would be exciting to have a double wedding," Favor said. Now Favor was against her. "You think so, Favor?" Joy asked. With Florence and her other two older sisters married and out of the house, there were fewer people left to be on her side whenever there was a disagreement. Favor nodded. "Ja, I do." "Wunderbar. Problem solved. Mom and Mr. Brunner can wait until you get married and have their wedding on the same day as you. You can have a double wedding with Mom." "I would love that." Favor looked hopefully at her mother. "Will you wait, Mom?" "Don't be silly. Of course I won't wait. Levi is planning things right now so he and Bliss can move in here in December, the night of the wedding." Mom shook her head and pushed her dinner plate away from her. "You girls will be the death of me one day." Joy looked at Isaac for support, but he kept quiet. When he finally spoke, she wished he hadn't. "We can at least think about what your mother's saying, couldn't we, Joy? Compromise a little?" He pushed his fork into the meat and then wiped it into the gravy, and then he stared at her, waiting for a response. When she didn't respond right away, he popped the portion of meat into his mouth. Joy pouted at Isaac to let him see how she felt. Didn't he know that he was supposed to be supporting her, even if he didn't agree? That's what a good husband would do, or even a good husband-to-be. "Let Joy have the day to herself, Mom." Finally, someone on her side. She smiled at Cherish, her youngest sister. Mom drew her mouth so tightly that lines started from her lips and fanned out across her face. "It's the money. The harvest wasn't good. Should have let Florence—" Hope, the next sister closest in age to Joy, couldn't finish what she started to say before Wilma slammed her fist down on the table. Everyone jumped, and even Isaac stopped chewing to stare at Wilma. "I won't have another word about Florence in this house." "I was just saying that she was the only one of us who knew—" "Go to your room, Hope." Hope opened her mouth, but no words came out. It was normally Cherish who was ordered to her room. She pushed out her chair and stood up. "I wasn't being rude. I was just—" "Room!" Wilma sprang to her feet and pointed at the door. "I'm going." Hope bunched the sides of her dress into her hands and rushed out of the room. Joy noticed she'd hardly touched her food and called after her, "I'll bring your dinner up to you soon." Joy was frustrated. It wasn't so long ago she thought her life was awful, and she had longed for things to go back to how they had been before Dot died. Now she wanted things to go back to how they'd been before Florence left. She hadn't realized how good life was. At least she had Isaac. But how she wished he'd stand up for her. Wilma turned to Isaac. "Will you talk to Joy some more about it, Isaac?" Isaac looked a little uncomfortable. It couldn't have been easy for him, especially because he and Joy were staying on in Wilma's house after the wedding. "I will talk with her, but I think her mind's made up. We could pay you back the money once we get on our feet. I have managed to save a little, but I had to send money back to my folks when my father became ill." "Nay, I said I'd pay, but that doesn't stop me from being practical. I've always been that way. A dollar saved is a dollar earned. That's what my grossdaddy used to say. You both need to save for your future." Was her mother trying to make her feel guilty? "Are you going to keep talking about this? Are you trying to wear me down, Mom? I've already said from the bottom of my heart that I don't want to be married on the same day as my mother having her second marriage when I'm having my first. We'll just get married at the bishop's house and have no wedding feast." Isaac placed his knife and fork down and swallowed his mouthful. "Do you intend to get married a second time, Joy?" "Nay, that's not what I meant." Joy joined in with Cherish and Favor as they giggled. Mom interlaced her fingers in front of her, placing her elbows on the table. "I didn't intend to get married a second time, but now I am. If you die first, Isaac, Joy could very well marry for a second time." Isaac puffed out his full cheeks. "I don't like the sound of that." "Would you rather her be lonely?" Cherish's eyes twinkled with mischief, obviously enjoying the drama of the moment. "No one needs you to talk, Cherish." Mom glared at her youngest daughter. Joy knew it wouldn't be long before her youngest sister would be sent to her room, too. "I'm sure Cherish didn't mean anything by it," Favor said. "We shall just ignore Cherish the best we can. Everyone does." Cherish's mouth dropped open. "Mom, that's not nice." Her mother glared back at her. "What's not very nice is for you to join in a conversation that has nothing to do with you." "Wait a moment," Favor said. "We're talking at the dinner table. Doesn't everybody have a right to join in the conversation? If you want to have a private one, you do that in private." Mom placed her knife and fork down and held her head with both hands. "God, where did I go wrong? All I know is what I want for my wedding day. What's wrong with that? Mercy had her wedding day, and Honor had hers. Why should I be the one who has to be different?" "I think she's right, Mom," Favor said. "I want my wedding day, too, alone, without sharing, now that I thought a bit more about it." Mom pulled her dinner plate back to herself and picked up her knife and fork. "You're too easily influenced, Favor. You're like the ship without a rudder, and that will lead you into trouble one day, my girl." "We'll have to wait and see about that, won't we?" Wilma shook her fork at Favor. "Levi says it's my fault for spoiling all of you and not giving you enough whippings. That's why he's insisting all you girls have jobs away from here." Sometimes they had been lazy, Joy admitted to herself, but they also worked hard when they had to. "Mom, that's not so. We've all worked long hours in the orchard." "Yeah," Favor agreed, "especially at harvest and all the years at the roadside stalls and at the markets when we had a store there. How are we going to work outside the home and also work in the orchard? There are only so many hours in one day." Cherish added, "And why didn't we open the shop this year to make extra funds?" "The shop just near the road?" Isaac asked. "I wondered that myself. People were driving to it, and then I'd see them driving away. There would have been a lot of money that was lost." Joy frowned at Isaac having the courage to talk about the shop much more boldly than he had been talking about their wedding. Mom shook her head. "I have to abide by Levi's decisions. He's going to be the head of the household. He said it was too much for me to open it this year. He said after we get married, he'll have a good look at all the work we're doing, even my work." "So he's going to make us work while you sit down and rest, Mom?" Cherish asked. "She deserves it, Cherish. She's the mudder." Mom smiled at Favor and then turned to Cherish. "And Levi will be your stepfather and the head of this house." "Never," Cherish muttered in a low voice that was barely heard. "He'll never be the boss of me." "Yeah, but why didn't he want the shop open?" Favor asked. "He wants to do things different than Dot did them. Every man has his own way he wants things done. Levi said if you all keep working for your family, you'll become soft. It will show you the value of money if you work for someone else." She turned to Joy's fiancé, Isaac. "Isaac, you've got it easy because you work for your brother-in-law." He gulped as he looked across at her. "I work harder for him because of it. I work real hard and more hours than I'm paid. Does Levi think I should get another job somewhere else?" "Nay, we've never talked about you. Levi's only concerned about the girls." He looked relieved and continued eating. Joy still had her mind on her wedding day and repeated the suggestion she made before that apparently no one had heard. "I'll just have a quick wedding at the bishop's house and invite no one if you're so worried about the money. But either way, I want to have my own day." Isaac smiled. "Yeah, that's what we'll do. That'll keep everyone happy." Mom ignored Isaac and stared at Joy. "Nay, you can't. Folks will think that you had to get married, and that will bring shame upon us all, the whole family. I know you keep saying that you don't want your wedding combined with mine, but it's not unusual that people in the community get married on the same day. But not Mutter and Dochter marrying on the same day at the same time, same place." Wilma looked over at Isaac. "You understand how it will look if you have a quick wedding at the bishop's, don't you, Isaac?" "I do," he nodded. "People will wonder why we did it that way, and they'll come to their own conclusions." Joy couldn't believe her ears. That was the second or third time in the last few minutes that he'd failed to agree with her. Not only that, he was making things worse by adding fuel to Wilma's fire. Favor was sitting next to Isaac, and she dug him in the ribs. "But you want what Joy wants, too, don't you? Whatever makes her happy, yeah?" "Yeah, I want Joy to have all that she wants." He gave Joy a big smile, but she was too upset with him to return it. "I don't think you should ask Isaac about this, Mom," Cherish said. "It would be embarrassing for him to tell you that he doesn't want the wedding on the same day. He's only being polite. Of course he doesn't want that. Who would?" Timmy chirped loudly from his cage in the corner of the room. "Will you make it be quiet, Cherish? And next time you go to the farm, leave him there." "Malachi doesn't like birds." Cherish got up from the table, scraping her chair across the linoleum flooring. Then she walked over and covered his cage like she did every night. "Good night, Timmy. And don't worry, you won't be going back to the farm until I move back there." The pointless conversations about a double wedding went back and forth, continuing over the dessert of apple pie, cream, and Isaac's favorite green jelly that Joy always made just for him. After dinner, as always, Joy and Isaac left the table to have a quiet moment on their own. In the warmer nights, they sat on the porch, but now the weather was cooler, so they chose to sit by the fire in the living room. With the others in the kitchen doing the after-dinner cleanup, Joy took hold of her husband-to-be's hand. "Isaac, you have to speak up for me." "It's hard. I could see you were upset, but I'm trying to stay on her good side for both our sakes. We do have to live here after we're married." She nodded. He did have a good point. He continued, "And I don't want to upset her or Levi. I really don't care when we get married or who gets married on our day. It makes no difference to me. She's bothered about it, though, so—" Oh no. Would she really have to compromise? Compromise about such an important event? It was unfathomable. She couldn't do it. Even the very thought of sharing the day with Mom twisted her stomach into a knot. She stared into his eyes, trying to use her womanly charms for the first time in her life. Snuggling closer to him, she placed her head on his shoulder. "What about what I want?" "That's important, too. You're the most important person in my whole life. Always will be. I'll have a talk with Wilma and see if I can change her mind." He looked into her eyes and smiled. "Trust me, it'll be okay." "Are you certain?" "Yeah." She let out a deep breath, and then Mom walked into the room, ending their brief conversation and causing them to move further apart. "Ada's stopping by the day after tomorrow, and she's helping us with the organizing of the wedding. It's too much for me to think about, and someone who left us helped with the other weddings. Florence. You can say her name." "I don't want it said in this house." Mom sat down. She'd deliberately cut short their alone time that they were normally allowed in the evening. Soon all the girls were huddled around the fire, except for Hope, who was still in disgrace in her room. Joy waited and waited for Isaac to say something to her mother about the wedding, but he never said one thing. A couple of times, Joy even raised the subject again, hoping he'd jump in. Nothing. An hour later, Joy excused herself and went to bed, even before Isaac had gone home. Joy had to be by herself. When Ada came, she was going to try to talk Joy into having a double wedding. That was the real reason she was coming. Joy had just walked into her darkened room when she heard the front door open. She rushed to the window and saw Isaac leaving. It had been rude of her not to walk him to the door and to make him leave without a proper good night. But she knew if she'd stayed downstairs any longer, she would have said something to him that she might later regret. All that night, Joy tossed and turned, worrying. A few times she dozed off, but woke in a cold sweat. If Isaac was disappointing her now, would he disappoint her further when they were married? There was no divorce, so she had to choose her husband wisely, or forever hold her peace, happy or miserable. As much as her heart loved Isaac, she had to be practical. Would Isaac be the kind of man who would always allow Wilma to run their lives? Chapter 2. The next morning, Joy was still upset by Isaac and her mother, but that disappeared after breakfast when she answered a knock on the door of her family home. In front of her stood a tidy and well-presented young man, an Englisher, whom she recognized immediately. "Excuse me, I hate to disturb you, but I'm looking for Florence Braithwaite." His short, dark hair was smoothed back, and his long-sleeved plaid shirt was tucked neatly into the jeans that hugged his hips. A grin settled on his handsome face as he stared at her. Joy sensed he was attracted to her. "You're one of the Jenkins boys from next door." "There's only one, and yeah, that's me. And you are?" "I'm not Florence." She pointed out the door toward her older half-sister's place, and then she moved out onto the porch. "She lives one property over that way. She used to live here." He nodded. "Well, I'm sorry to bother you then." He gave her a beaming smile and made no move to leave. "How long have you lived here?" "Ever since I was born." "Me too." He laughed. "Not here, but in my house. I can't believe we haven't met if we've both lived here, so close, for so long." "The houses aren't that close, and there are different roads that go by each property. We don't normally drive down the road in front of your house." "I know." He kept smiling at her, and somehow it didn't feel awkward, and neither did she want him to leave. "I've been told that Florence and her husband bought your property." "That's right." He nodded. "So you're moving?" He rested one arm against the doorframe and then casually leaned against it. "Me and my folks are staying on for a year. That was the deal." "That's good. Then where are you going after that?" She couldn't help wondering what he thought about her in her Amish clothes. Englishers always had their preconceived ideas about them. From the way he lingered, she was growing more confident he found her attractive. "I'm hoping to stick around. After the year's over, my folks are going to retire to Florida. That seems to be where all the old folks go." He laughed at his own words, and then cleared his throat. "Why do you think we haven't met before?" Shrugging her shoulders, she answered, "We don't know the same people, I guess." She heard her sisters sniggering from inside the house, and she was certain she heard one of them mention Isaac's name. Isaac. An image of him flew into her mind. At once, she felt bad about being delighted to talk to the stranger. But they were just talking. What was the harm in that? She wouldn't let it go any further. Closing the door behind her, she stepped past him. "Excuse me, I was just walking out of the house when you knocked." She moved to the edge of the porch and placed her hands on the top of the railing. "Were you going somewhere just now? I'm not holding you up, am I?" "No." She glanced at him, smiling. "I was just coming outside to get some fresh air. I wasn't going anywhere." When the giggling didn't stop and he was now looking at the door and the windows, she had to say something. "Those are my sisters laughing." His grin broadened. "How many do you have?" Joy couldn't help enjoying the attention of someone new. She looked into his hazel eyes, and then looked away, wondering if he too would have agreed with Wilma the way Isaac had. "I'm sorry, what was the question?" He flashed her a wide grin. "How many sisters?" "Oh, I have 6, and 2 older brothers. But now there's only me and 3 of my sisters living at home." "I'm an only child. I envy you." "No, I envy you. It must be so peaceful to be on your own with just your folks." He shrugged his shoulders. "I've got nothing to gauge it by." She thought she'd better say something else. "What did you want to see Florence about?" "It's about the cottage on my folks' land." "Oh, well, it's not theirs anymore. I was wondering if Florence and Carter might let me lease it. I need to spread my wings and leave the nest, so to speak." When Joy giggled, he smiled at her. "What's so funny?" "The little bird's not going far from the nest." He laughed. "True enough. But my mom's a pretty good cook, and it's close enough that I might get my laundry done for me as well." "I see what you're doing. If they're moving to Florida in 12 months, you want to take advantage of having them close for as long as you can. Unless you're going with them?" "No way. You're right. I'm going to stick around here. But for now, I need my own space, so I can invite my friends over, if you know what I mean. Old friends. And the new ones I meet." He gave her a wink. Then she looked away, not knowing exactly what he meant, but some of the options that came to mind caused her cheeks to warm. She came back to reality and saw how easily and quickly she'd been flattered and intrigued by an Englisher, when she should have only had eyes for her beloved. She knew it was all her fault. The anger she'd had the night before had made this happen. She'd taken her eyes from God and hadn't read her Bible for days. For her, it had been a huge departure from her normal routine. Why did temptations come in such delightful packages? He walked down the steps away from her and then turned back. "I might see you around then." "Maybe." He hesitated and placed his fingers through the belt loops on his jeans. "Do you ever go out anywhere?" She shook her head, not wanting to be drawn away. She had to stay strong, but that was hard to do when the moment was so pleasing. "Not much." Shaking her head vigorously, she affirmed, "I don't." "Would you be allowed to have coffee with me sometime? Would that be against your rules?" His words were spoken so softly and with such understanding that she knew he was a good person. Her heart raced, but she opened her mouth to tell him she couldn't because she was about to marry in a couple of months. Before any words could be uttered, Hope stumbled out the front door, as though she'd been pushed. Chapter 3. Joy's suspicions were confirmed when she heard giggling, and then the door shut loudly behind Hope. Hope gained her balance and smoothed down her apron and adjusted her prayer cup. He stared at Hope, shocked. "This is my sister Hope, and the giggling you can hear is coming from my other 2 sisters. Younger sisters." She could see a different expression on his face when he looked at Hope, and she couldn't help the twinge of jealousy that tugged at her insides. "Well, hello, Hope." He stepped back onto the porch and held out his hand toward her. She smiled as she shook it. "Hello. I'm Fairfax Jenkins." "Nice to meet you, Fairfax." Her tone was girly and flirtatious as she looked up at him from underneath her dark eyelashes. Joy was shocked. She'd never seen Hope act this way. "It's a mighty fine orchard you've got here, Hope. Best in the area." Now he was speaking to Hope as though Joy wasn't even there. Cherish opened the front door and stepped out. "It was once, except for this season. All the fruit rotted on the trees due to bad management. Then came the bugs because we couldn't keep up with all the windfall apples this year." Cherish groaned loudly. "They were like a harvest of their very own. We could turn it into a bug orchard. Maybe that's what we should do. We could sell bugs." He raised his eyebrows. "That's not good." "This is my younger sister, Cherish," Joy said, slightly amused at Cherish's words. If only she had half Cherish's confidence. Tilting her chin upward, Cherish stared at him. Nice to meet you. It always amazed Joy that the 6 of them could each be so different. This is Fairfax from next door, one of the Jenkins sons. The only one, he said, while looking between Cherish and Hope, most likely trying to decide which one he liked the look of best. I'm the oldest son, the youngest son, and the middle son, all rolled into one. Even though they were very different in personality, Joy's 3 younger sisters were similar in appearance. Cherish gave him a nod. Just thought you'd like to know that, about the orchard. Yes, good to know. Thanks for telling me. If I ever want bugs, I'll know where to come. Joy said, Come on out, Favor. You might as well meet him, too. Cherish pulled open the door to reveal Favor. She stepped onto the porch and nervously wrung her hands in front of her apron. I have 7 pen pals. A grin covered his face. Good for you. Well, I would have visited before now if I'd known such pretty girls lived here. Joy knew she had to do something here. He was an Englisher, and she was the older sister. She had to put an end to this before one of them was led astray. Cherish would fall in love with him if she hadn't done so already, and Hope too, judging from the moony look on her face. Cherish was the only one who'd act on her feelings, since she was so impulsive. She always acted before she thought. Like the time she'd tried to steal Honor's boyfriend, even after he'd become Honor's fiancé. With those things on her mind, Joy stepped in front of her sisters. It was nice to meet you, Fairfax. Would you be able to find your way to Florence's house all right? It's just the neighboring property, isn't it? I don't think I'll get too lost. Just out the driveway here, and then up the next driveway? Joy gave him a big smile so he wouldn't think she was trying to get rid of him, even though she was. That's right. Cherish stepped forward. I'll go with you to show you the way. Thank you. I'd be delighted. Nay, you have chores to do, Cherish, Joy said, almost stepping between them. I don't. I finished them all. Joy shook her head. I've just found some more for you to do. He smiled at Cherish as he backed away. Another time, maybe? Then he looked around at all of them. I'll have to think up something that I can invite all you girls to if I get that lease on the cottage. That's very kind of you, but we wouldn't be allowed to go, Joy said, shaking her head. I'll go, said Cherish. No, she won't. I'm sorry, none of us could go to show you the way or see the cottage if they let you lease it. But it was very nice to meet you, all the same. He nodded, but Joy could see he was very disappointed. And she was disappointed, too. Disappointed that her sisters had come out when she had been getting so much attention. How could she find him so appealing when she was in love with Isaac? It troubled her. Now she understood what it was like to be tempted. Chapter 4. Joy reminded herself that she loved Isaac, and only Isaac. Besides, this man was an Englisher, and she wasn't going to follow in the path of Florence. She stared at the way her younger sisters were gawking at Fairfax. Although she wasn't going to fall for him, she wasn't so certain about each of her younger sisters. Well, I hope I see you girls around real soon. Fairfax turned away and walked back to his white pickup truck. With all the girls watching, he drove slowly away. He was handsome, Favor said. The most handsome man I've ever seen. And he was so nice. Hope stared after him. And he asked you out, Joy. I heard him, Cherish said. Yeah, Danka for saving me, whoever pushed Hope out the door. I did it, said Cherish. I kind of thought it might have been you. Why did I say that thing about pen pals? Favor put both hands up to her cheeks. He'll think I'm weird now. It doesn't matter. You'll never see him again, said Hope. You were nervous. Cherish patted her sister's arm. You have to talk to more men to get past your nerves. It's easy once you do it a few times. Hope shook her head. I wouldn't be able to. Men are different. I guess I'm used to being around girls. Just start talking to them and start by giving compliments. Cherish opened the front door and walked back inside while still talking over her shoulder. Wait until I tell Isaac you were talking to the Englisher neighbor, Joy. He'd better watch out. You might take after Florence and marry an Englisher neighbor, just like she did. Wouldn't that be romantic? Joy caught up with her. Why tell Isaac anything? Because it would be funny. Nay, don't tell him. He definitely wouldn't find it funny. Not at all. You see, he's lacking in confidence, and it'd really upset him. He doesn't lack confidence. He does. I know him better than you do. I think he's a bit shy. Oh, wait, who were we talking about? Asked Hope. We were talking about Isaac, Joy said. Cherish grinned. I would have gone out with Fairfax if he'd asked me, but I knew you wouldn't want to, Joy. Joy wasn't shocked to hear Cherish say that she would have accepted his offer. Her outrageous flirting ways had been the cause of Mom sending her to Aunt Dagmar's farm so many times. Please don't say anything to Isaac. What's it worth? In what way? Will you do my chores for a week if I keep quiet? Hope and Favor, who'd been listening to their whole conversation, giggled. Joy couldn't believe this of her sister. I'll do no such thing. Do you want to hurt Isaac? Nay, I really like him. He's one of my favorite people. But I just want him to see that you're special, and other men want you. So he'd better keep his socks lifted up. Lift his game, or whatever. You know what I mean. He doesn't need to lift his game. It'll upset him. Can't you see that? Cherish's eyes twinkled. How about doing all my chores for a day, then? Why must you bargain with people all the time? That's how I get my way. It's negotiation. It's a win-win. You get what you want, and I get what I want. Don't you see that? Why can't you do things for other people because you're a nice person and because it's the right thing to do? Treat other people how you'd like to be treated. I don't mind bargaining with people. I don't say anything to anyone that I wouldn't want them to say to me. This is how the world works. Yeah, your world, not my world, and not anyone else's world. Everything has a value attached. You want me to keep quiet, and I don't want to. So how badly do you want me to keep quiet? Cherish leaned forward. What's it worth, eh? Joy was exasperated. There was no use reasoning with Cherish. For Isaac's sake, she had to give in to her. How about I do the washing up for you for a week? She knew it wasn't good to encourage her sister in her evil deeds like this, but it was a difficult situation, and she'd brought all this on herself by being hateful and thinking awful thoughts all night. Cherish raised her eyebrows. And the drying? No. Joy folded her arms across her chest. I think you're going a bit too far, and I should probably forget the whole thing. Or maybe I should tell Mom what you're doing. And what's she going to do about it? Send me to my room or back to the farm? Cherish gave a little giggle as she shrugged her shoulders. Okay, washing up for a week, starting tonight. Joy nodded, relieved that Isaac wouldn't get his feelings hurt. He'd blame it on his size. He needed constant reassurance that it didn't bother her, which was the truth. Wunderbar. Cherish ran up the stairs to her bedroom, leaving Joy feeling worse than when she had awakened that morning. With Isaac moving in after they were married, what would their lives be like? Not only that, Levi and his daughter Bliss were moving in after he married Mom. What a crowded house they'd have. Chapter 5. Minutes later, Fairfax knocked on the door of Florence and Carter's cottage. Florence opened the door. What a surprise to see you, Fairfax. Come in. Thank you. He bent down to take off his shoes. Don't worry about that. I have to wash the floors later today anyway. That's okay. It doesn't take long to get them off. Once he'd taken off his shoes, he walked inside. Come sit in front of the fire. Florence sat next to Spot, who was still sleeping, and Fairfax sat on the opposite couch. What brings you here today? Before he could answer, Carter walked down the stairs. Fairfax rose to his feet when he saw him. Carter walked over and greeted him by shaking hands. Would you like a cup of tea or coffee? Florence asked. No, I'm fine, thanks. I just had coffee at home. When Carter sat, Fairfax said, What I'm here about is... I'll get right to the point. Carter said, That's always best. Florence held her breath, wondering what he was going to say. Had his parents changed their mind about selling the orchard? It was too late for that. Contracts had been signed. Or could they want to leave sooner than the 12 months they'd agreed upon? I wonder if you might lease the cottage to me. Florence was relieved. They wouldn't have to change their plans. She glanced over at Carter, wondering what he would think about that. She had hoped that Joy and Isaac might have the opportunity to live there. Then again, she knew that might create a lot of trouble for the young couple with the community, and particularly with Wilma. I'm sorry, Fairfax, but we did have the idea of Florence's sister staying there once she's married. I've just come from there. I've just met 4 of your sisters, Florence. Don't tell me one of them is getting married. That is disappointing. He drew his eyebrows together. Which one of them is getting married? They all look too young. The older one, Joy. We do tend to get married young. As soon as she said it, she realized she was still referring to herself as Amish. I mean, people in the Amish community do. Slowly, he nodded. I wonder why she never mentioned it. If you don't mind me asking, why were you there? Florence asked. I just met them when I was looking for you. His eyes flickered to Carter. I was looking for both of you. But why? You knew we lived here, right? You were there when your parents asked me about leaving the community and marrying Carter. He'd heard her whole story and knew very well where they lived. A grin broke out on his face. Guilty. I was bending the truth. I've always seen them out and about in their buggy, and I was intrigued. I wanted to meet them. Florence didn't know what to say, but she saw that Carter found it highly amusing. I knew the only way I was ever going to meet them was to just knock on the door. If I've only got another year here, I thought, why wait? I know exactly what you mean, Carter said. Do the others have boyfriends? Fairfax asked Florence. Carter interrupted. Forget it. I managed to steal one away from the family, and that was hard work. Took me years before I finally talked her into it. Yeah, but you'd do it all again, wouldn't you? The young man asked. Carter's eyes met Florence, and he smiled. Yes, of course I would. And I'm not saying it because she's sitting right here staring at me with her huge blue eyes. I didn't go looking for her, and I didn't seek her out. We met because we were neighbors. Fairfax pointed to himself. I'm a neighbor. I can't disagree with that, Carter said. Do any of them have boyfriends, Florence? He repeated. Florence was uncomfortable. It had taken her a great many heart-wrenching moments and much worry over leaving the community, and she didn't want that for her sisters. Not if they could find nice Amish men that they loved. Even though he seemed a decent young man and came from a nice family, she had to discourage him. Did you come here to ask about the cottage, or to ask about my sisters? One side of his lips twisted into a smile. The cottage, firstly. What do you say? I wouldn't like your sister and her new husband to be homeless, though, Florence. It doesn't matter. It was just an idea I had in the back of my head, and it probably wouldn't have worked out for them anyway. There's too much against them living there. Carter said, the family still aren't happy about Florence leaving, and it could cause unwanted friction. I understand. Good for me, then, but not so good for them. I'll pay the going rate. I think we can work out something to suit you and us, Carter said. Thanks. I'll look after it really well. You better, Carter said, wagging a fatherly finger at him. Why do you want to move into it? It's just yourself, right? Yes, it'll be only me. Joy asked the same thing. I told her it was close enough to my mother's cooking and her washing machine. If I play my cards right, I'll get a meal at night and my washing ironed and folded. Ah, smart man. Give Florence and me a couple of days to think it over? Can you wait that long? Sure can. Fairfax bounded to his feet. I'll get going now. Florence walked him to the door. When he got into his pickup truck and zoomed away, she closed the door and turned around. Fairfax seems like a nice young man. Yes. And which one of your Bonnet sisters does he have his eyes on, I wonder? It sounded like Joy. He was so disappointed to find out that she was getting married, but he wouldn't have had time to get to know any of them. What do you think about putting him in the cottage? Florence sat back down. I think it's probably a better option. Joy moving there with Isaac might have upset Wilma, and I don't want to do anything to upset her. She's already mad enough with me and with you. Besides that, she's expecting them to live with her. That's what's been arranged. She knew Wilma didn't like change and preferred to stay in the comfort of a routine. If things didn't go how Wilma had thought they would, it threw her into a panic. I wonder how long that will last. What's that? What will last? How long will Wilma be mad at both of us? Florence shook her head. I don't know. It could be a long time, and it could be forever. You're right. She has no maternal feelings toward me, or any feelings at all toward me, except for negative ones. He scoffed. And I did steal you away. No, you didn't. I did. Florence bit her lip, wondering if Wilma was that hard-hearted, or was it that she was putting up a wall to save herself from facing that the baby boy she'd blocked out of her heart and her mind had come back. Anyway, I'll stop by the day after tomorrow and discuss money with him. What will you charge? Something low, but not too low. Enough to make him feel like he's out of his parents' home and paying his way in the world. She nodded, thinking what a good father he was going to make. After I finish sending a few emails, I've got a few errands to run in town. Do you want to come with me? No, I might stay here if that's okay. Sure. Getting ready to face the world was an effort. At home, she just wore t-shirts and sweatpants. She couldn't wear those if they went into town, and it was an effort to change. That was something she'd never had to think about when she'd been Amish. Then, most of the time, going into town meant putting on a clean apron. No, she'd rather stay home with Spot and make plans for their new life. Chapter 6. Carter had only been gone a few minutes when there was another knock at the door. They never got visitors, and now they had already received 2 in one day. She opened it to see a worried-looking Joy. Hello, I didn't hear the buggy. Had Joy come to ask her to come to her wedding? Was she looking so distraught because Wilma didn't want her there? I walked. Florence stepped aside so her sister could come in. She walked over to the couch and sat beside Spot and patted him. He opened one eye and looked at Joy, and then went back to sleep. You just missed Carter. He'll be gone for a while. I know, I saw him leave. Gott is tempting me. I've never had so much interest from men. They're all looking at me now. Even Englishers. And now also young men in the community who've never been interested before. I haven't changed. I'm still the same. Why all the interest all of a sudden? I don't know, but you are a very attractive girl. You're sure about Isaac? She didn't like to ask, but neither did she want her sister to feel she should get married because everyone else was doing it, or because everyone expected it of her. Yeah, but I have doubts when I shouldn't say it. Joy knew she had to speak to Florence. She was the only person who would be able to understand. Just answer me yes or no. Do you still want to marry Isaac? I do. It's just that I'm a little bit upset that he sided with Mom when we were talking about something the other night. Florence narrowed her eyes. Talking about what? Joy rubbed her eyes, trying not to cry. About having the wedding on the same day as her and Levi. Having a double wedding. She paused to gauge Florence's reaction. From the look on her face, Florence didn't like it any better than she. Mom's been going on and on about it, and she won't let up. I can see why you wouldn't want that. She asked Isaac if it bothered him, and he said it didn't. I was so upset when I heard the words come out of his mouth. Don't be too upset. He was only stating his opinion. Joy shook her head. Nay, you see, he knew how I felt about it. I asked him after why he hadn't agreed. I know he was just being honest, but I wish he could have. I know what he was doing. Florence shook her head. He wouldn't have wanted to cross Wilma. Why not? She's not so scary. She's allowing you to stay at the house and save money so you can get a place of your own someday, isn't she? I know he didn't want to upset her, but what about me? Am I being unreasonable or expecting too much? She needed reassurance from Florence. She was so like their Dot, with her sensible ideas of what was right and wrong, or even reasonable. Florence would be the best person to guide her. Maybe. It's a hard place for Isaac to be, in between his future wife and future mother-in-law. He wants to keep both of you happy. When you put it like that, I can see what you're saying. But she's trying to force me to have a double wedding, and that's why it's vital that he agrees with me. So it won't happen. And when you told him how you feel, did he get it? Did he fully take it in? Yeah, Joy sighed. I just want him to speak up a bit more. You've got to understand that no one can be 100% perfect. Don't be too hard on him. He's a good man. I know. It troubled me when I was talking to someone recently, a man, and I wanted the attention. I think it was only because I'm upset with Isaac. God found a place where he could test me. We're all tested and tempted daily with different things. Keep focused on God, and don't be so hard on yourself. Danke, Florence. Maybe you're right. I was tempted when I was low. I need to have a good long talk with Isaac. And with Wilma. I know, but that's not so easy. She's never cared what I wanted. I suggested having a quiet wedding at the bishop's house, but then she thought people would get the wrong idea. Joy threw her hands in the air. I can't win. What's worse is that she's arranged Ada to come tomorrow. There will be 2 against 1. Florence stared at her third oldest stepsister and felt sorry for her. It might be easier for her to just go along with what Ada and Wilma wanted. What kind of wedding did you and Carter have? Blurted Joy. A very quick one. Joy laughed for the first time since she had gotten there. I know that, but who was there? Just me, Carter, the celebrant, and a witness we didn't know. And you were happy with that? It wasn't what I had always pictured in my mind. But then again, neither was the idea to marry an Englisher and leave the community. That was the very last thing I thought I would do. She lifted up her hands. And here I am in his house, married to him, and we have a dog. Soon we'll have an orchard. And you're happy? I'm happier than I've ever been. But it's all come at a price, hasn't it? Florence looked at her sister, the one who was the most pious and God-fearing of them all. She was the first to quote scriptures in every situation and had always seemed so in control. You're right, Joy. Leaving the community and my family was a big sacrifice. But I feel I've gained so much more. I've never told anyone this before, but I felt like I was dying and suffocating. Now I feel like I'm growing and being the person I was meant to be. Joy's features contorted. Aren't you worried about where you'll be in eternity? I think there are many roads leading to the same place. Nay. Joy clenched her jaw. I can't agree with you. I'm sorry, I'd like to, but I just don't. Florence nodded, and knew in that moment she was not going to get that wedding invitation. That's fine. Joy jumped to her feet. Thanks for talking with me. I feel much better now. I should go. They're probably looking for me. Sure. I'll walk down with you to the fence line. She followed Joy to the front door. When they got there, Joy turned around to face Florence. You stay here where it's warm. I'll go by myself. Thanks again for talking to me, Florence. Florence did not get the embrace she expected, and Joy hurried away. Chapter 7. The next morning, Ada arrived at the Baker house to help with the organization of the two weddings. Joy had seen the buggy approaching and had hurried upstairs to her room. Ada was overbearing and pushy. Could she stand her ground with both Ada and her mother insisting on the ridiculous double wedding scenario? If it was one of her friends or her sisters wanting a double wedding with her, that might be different. But her own mother? Nay, it was an awful idea. But would she enjoy her wedding if she made her mother so sad and cross with her? Now she was starting to dread her own wedding. Joy sat on her bed and said a quick prayer before she had to face them. Then she heard her mother at the bottom of the stairs calling out to her, "Joy, come downstairs. Ada's here." "I'm coming. I'll be 2 minutes." Joy was annoyed at the both of them ganging up on her. She was convinced that's what they'd planned. Favor opened her bedroom door and peered in at her.
"What's the matter with you? You never stay in your bedroom."
"I'm just fed up with it all. I feel like not getting married at all now. The whole thing's been ruined." Joy rarely cried, but now she could feel the tears filling her eyes. Favor sat down next to her.
"She didn't mention another thing about the thing that upset you all day yesterday. I think she's accepted what you said."
Joy smiled at Favor. She knew what she was trying to say.
"I know, but only because she's got Ada here now to back her up."
Joy picked up the end of her apron and dabbed at her tears.
"Nay, she's here to work out what food we'll serve and how much we'll need."
"I hope so."
"Come on, it will be all right."
"Okay, but if there's one word mentioned about it, I'm walking right out of the house, and I'll walk right down the road until I calm down. And I might never come back."
"I'll come downstairs with you."
"Okay, Denka." They stood up, and arm in arm, they walked down the stairs and into the kitchen. Ada turned around and smiled at them. "There you are."
"Hello, Ada,"
Joy said, as she sat in the chair next to her. "Your mother and I were just discussing that it wouldn't matter if we had too much food for your wedding, because we can always save it for hers, because it's so close." Favor giggled in the background as she poured herself a glass of water. "What's funny?" asked Wilma, turning to glare at her second youngest.
"You'd be having Joy's leftovers."
"I don't mind that. Food is food. It'll be all right. Now, shall we have the same kinds of food that we had for your sister's weddings, or were you planning on trying something different?" Joy was relieved. Not a word had been said about a double wedding.
"I don't really mind about the food, and Isaac eats anything.
His favorite is mashed potato and our apple sauerkraut."
"Nay, Mom, his favorite food is roast chicken with crispy skin."
"I wasn't talking about meat," Mom snarled with her lip curled. Ada jumped in quickly. "I'll start by writing out a list." She reached forward and grabbed the pen and paper from the middle of the table. Over the next hour, the three of them worked out a menu, while Favor sat at the end of the table writing to one of her pen pals. Hope made chocolate chip cookies, and Cherish played with the two dogs outside the house so their mother wouldn't complain. While all that was happening, Timmy the budgerigar sat looking at everyone from his cage in the corner of the room. "Finally done. Are we all happy?" Ada asked. Joy wondered if her mother had relented completely, or if this was the calm before the storm. She wasn't ready to relax just yet.
"Danka for helping us with all this, Ada. Florence helped us for the last 2 weddings."
"I don't want Florence's name mentioned in this house," Mom said. Favor said,
"But you mentioned her the other night at dinner, and she's part of this family."
"She made her choice. She left, and in doing so, she caused us to lose the harvest." "She could have waited," Wilma said through gritted teeth. "It was selfish."
"She didn't cause us to lose anything. She offered to help with the harvest, and you wouldn't let her. We all watched most of the apples rot away." Hardly any were good for eating once they were finally brought in and separated out. Hush, Favor. It doesn't matter what you say. You're too young to know what you're talking about, so keep quiet. Until Levi moves in as my husband and your stepfather, I am the head of this household, and I'm telling you not to mention her again.
Joy was embarrassed with her mother speaking like that in front of Ada. She wasn't game to say anything, though. She glanced at Ada, who was keeping out of it, and was now staring at the list of food she'd written. It would have been a good harvest if it had been managed properly, and she guessed that Mom knew that. What would happen when Levi married Mom? Now was the time to broach a difficult subject, one she'd been putting off.
I know no one wants to talk about Florence, but there's a particular thing I want to talk about regarding her.
Ada and Wilma stared at Joy.
Well, spit it out, her mother said brusquely. I don't want to get married without Florence being there, too. Englishers come to weddings. It should be okay with everyone. There were even some of Dot's old friends at Mercy's wedding. I saw them there.
Ada leaned back in the chair and looked at Wilma. I thought this might happen. Mom just stared at Ada, blankly, avoiding eye contact with Joy.
Why wouldn't I want my older sister there?
Joy hoped Ada might say something encouraging, but doubted that she would. The lines deepened in Wilma's forehead.
She's just caused a lot of trouble for me, for us.
Hope said, I don't know if that's quite accurate. Let's take away the veil of hate and mistrust, and let us have compassion for one another. Everyone stared at Hope.
You're sounding just like Joy,
Favor said. That's what I was thinking, agreed Ada. I want her at my wedding, too, if I ever get married. What has she done wrong? Did she cheat? Did she steal? Did she kill someone? Nay, she just fell in love with a man who seems kind and gentle. Sure, she's been mean and bossy to me sometimes, but she's still family. We can't force anyone to follow our ways. Mom's jaw dropped open as she stared at Hope. Ada chuckled. Out of the mouths of babes. I'm not a child anymore. Hope shook her head. Nay, you're not. Ada looked across the table at Wilma. I think she said something we should listen to. What would be the harm in having Florence at the wedding? Chapter 8. Finally, Joy felt a spark of hope. At first, she'd been certain Ada was there to be an adversary. Now she was an ally. Is that right, Hope? And who do you plan to marry? Mom asked her, totally avoiding the issue at hand. I will get married one day, and when I do, I want Florence there. She's part of my family as much as any one of my sisters. This was what Joy had been waiting for. People to back her up.
What do you say, Mom? Can I invite Florence? Well, if that's what you want and it means so much to you, it's up to you. But I won't have her at my wedding. I absolutely forbid it. Denka, but... Joy opened her eyes widely. You're the only mutter she knows. Are you really going to not allow her there for your wedding? I am, and I don't see why you want her at yours after she left us. Her words were spat out, and Ada leaned over and patted Wilma's hand, as though the hatred had gone too far. Well, I don't, Ada, and I won't apologize to anybody about that. I think you should go next door and personally ask her if she could come to my wedding. It would mean a lot to me. Joy didn't hold out much hope of that happening, but she'd learned a thing or two from Cherish about being pushy. Mom could only say no. As Joy watched the look of terror flash across her mother's face, Ada said, Yeah, I think that's best, Wilma, and then at the same time you can mention that she's not welcome at yours, but you don't mind her coming to Joy's wedding. I'm sure she'll understand, since she knows that things aren't the best between the two of you at the moment. Mom's jaw dropped, and she stared at her best friend. I'm not going over there. How could you possibly expect me to do that?
Ada simply said, "It would be good if you did."
I mean, what would I say? I don't want to go anywhere near the place. You simply invite her to the wedding, and that's that. It would be a nice gesture.
Ada smiled.
You'll feel better once you do it.
Mom motioned toward Joy.
It's Joy who wants her there. She should do it.
And she will if you refuse. It's nothing to upset yourself over. Ada patted Wilma's hand. Settle yourself down now. Calm down.
I'll do it then,
Joy said, pouting for effect. Ada interjected once more, saying to Wilma, "I think you need to do it, Wilma, so that Florence and her new husband feel welcome at the wedding." Hope nodded. "I totally agree with you. Otherwise, they'd feel funny about coming here after everything that's happened." Ada chuckled.
You're growing up very fast, Hope.
Hope smiled, and all eyes were on Wilma, who then looked about the room.
I don't know where Cherish is.
"She's outside with the dogs because you were complaining about them running through the house. Remember?" Hope said.
That's right. That's good then."
Right at that moment, Cherish moved through the door.
Did I miss anything?
She sat down at the table with them, having left the dogs outside.
Nay, it seems they're all trying to make me go to see Florence and ask her to come to Joy's wedding. Are you going to do it?
Cherish's eyes grew wide.
It's a terrible idea and something I don't want to do.
"It would mean a lot to me, Mom," Joy repeated.
Yeah, and it would mean a lot to me not to do it, too. What would Dot want? Cherish asked.
Ada nodded. "I was thinking the very same thing. I think he'd want his oldest daughter to be there at Joy's wedding."
She can come if she wants. I'm not trying to stop her coming, but I don't know why I have to go there while he's there and ask her. Don't you know how awkward that whole situation is?
Ada raised her eyebrows. "Half of that situation was of your making." Everyone went dead quiet. They knew Ada meant that Carter, the man Florence had married, was the illegitimate child that Wilma had adopted out to her sister. Then she'd completely wiped him from her mind.
Ada, do you honestly think I should go there and face them?
"I do, yeah. I'm sure you don't want any bad feeling between the two of you, do you?"
No, certainly not. But at the same time, she made her choice.
"I entirely agree with you. I'm so disappointed in the choices she has made." Ada shook her head and then made tisk-tisk sounds. "She's not the girl I thought she was. I'd come to look on her as one of my own, so I understand why you're upset with what she's done. Still, she is part of your family, and Jesus is always smiling while he holds open the door." She leaned on her elbows, looking directly at Wilma. "Should we make it harder for her to walk through that door?" Wilma's fingertips flew to her lips. "Nay, I didn't think of it like that. Do you think she might return one day?" "Only if God wills it." Joy smiled, knowing that Mom would have to do it now. Ada had talked her into it.
"I'll do it. But it doesn't have to be done today, does it?"
"Today or tomorrow," Joy said, "to make sure she keeps December 7th free and doesn't plan anything else." Wilma wriggled uncomfortably in her chair.
"Very well."
"Another thing. I've heard from Sally." Ada stared at Mom.
"Sally? Who is that?"
Ada frowned at Wilma. "Sally is Honor and Mercy's mother-in-law."
"Oh, I didn't think you'd have anything to talk with her about."
"We keep in contact. I told her that Matthew could stay here for Joy's wedding." Mom leaned forward.
"Here? In my house?"
"Yeah."
"I don't know if I can fit him in with my two girls and both their husbands staying here. Could he stay with you, perhaps?"
"Nay, he can't."
They're staying with me. Both couples. Mom stared wide-eyed at Ada. My two daughters I haven't seen for ages are staying with you?
Chapter 9. Yeah, Ada answered matter-of-factly, as though there was nothing wrong with Wilma's daughters staying at her house.
And Stephen and Jonathan.
Wilma's bottom lip wobbled.
Why would they arrange things with you? Sally and I have always gotten along well. Sally and her husband can't come. It's too far for them to travel. We write all the time. Didn't I mention that to you? Nay, I don't think you ever did. Why can't the girls and their husbands stay here and Matthew stay with you? That would make more sense. The girls and I have a lot to catch up on. I have more space now that Samuel has built on more rooms. She patted Wilma's hand once more in a motherly kind of way. I'm saving you work. You'll have so much to do with Joy's wedding, and then yours, just days after that. It's no bother having my own doctor staying with me. It's something I was looking forward to.
Ada shook her head.
You'll have plenty of time to see them.
Joy noticed her mother looked annoyed, but that was all that was said. Joy didn't like the sound of Matthew staying in the house. Just like Mom, she'd been looking forward to spending time with her two newly pregnant sisters. After all, she might get pregnant soon after she was married, and she needed to know what to expect. When Ada went home, Mom went to bed for a nap. Joy and Favor rearranged things in the barn, waiting on the feed delivery, while Cherish and Hope sat in the kitchen, eating their way through a batch of cookies they'd made the previous day.
Bliss told me that when her father marries Mom, he's going to force us all to get jobs. He wants us to bring money in, and we'll have to work 5 or 6 days a week.
I know, she told me that too, said Hope. It's worse than Mom was saying. He'll force us.
Where are you going to get a job?
Christina already said she could give me work sewing for 2 days a week.
That's fine, but you'll have to work 5 days a week. What job will you do on the other days?
Cherish wiped cookie crumbs from her mouth and then reached for another. What about our stall? We could start up at the farmer's market again.
I said that to Bliss, and she said her father would not think that's a real job. I'm not looking forward to him moving in here and taking over our lives.
Cherish groaned.
Why does he get to tell us what to do?
You're blessed to have the farm, Hope said to Cherish.
I know. It'll be my escape. You can move with me. We can run it together. To think Florence and Mom sent me there as a punishment. It did feel like that at the beginning, until I got to know Dagmar. I'm going to move there as soon as I can. Until then, all we can do is keep knocking on doors and leaving our names at places. What more can we do?
We need a miracle. Hope reached for her second cookie.
It's quite ridiculous that we can't cook and sell our own goods just because Levi doesn't want us to.
I know. None of it makes any sense.
Nothing about Levi makes any sense because it makes no sense that Mom is going to marry him. It'll ruin all our lives. Just you wait and see. I wish she'd change her mind, but I don't think she will. She's already decided that she needs someone to look after her in the orchard. There's no one else besides Levi.
True. At least you and I can agree on that. Hope grinned.
Probably about the only thing we agree on. Except for
what?
I saw the way you looked at Fairfax. You thought he was handsome, and so did I. That's one more thing we can agree on.
Hope stared at Cherish. I thought you said you weren't interested in him.
I'm not, but that doesn't mean I don't think he's handsome.
He is handsome. Hope nodded in agreement.
You finally admit it? You have been thinking about him.
I haven't.
I saw the way you stuck your head out from the buggy yesterday when we were down at the end of his road.
Did not. Cherish shot back.
Did too.
Well, there's no use talking about him, because he's an Englisher anyway.
Oh, really? I hadn't noticed,
Cherish said sarcastically. Hope smiled at her younger sister. You know what I mean. I'll have to find someone in the community. I feel a certain amount of pressure with everyone else being married, all my older sisters. She leaned in closer. Remember we thought Joy would never be able to find anyone to put up with her? Cherish covered her mouth and giggled. I know, and Isaac loves her.
She's found a perfect match, and now we have to find someone for you, Hope.
You want to help me?
Not really, but there's not much else to do except look for a job, and we're not having much success at that. I'm just not motivated when I know I'll be living at my farm soon. What's the point of getting a job when I'm going to move to the farm when I'm 18? The farm will give me an income.
I'll just have to wait until someone appears. Maybe someone will come to Joy's wedding.
I doubt it.
Cherish, you have to have more faith than that. If God parted the Red Sea, he can find a good match for me and bring him to the wedding.
What if you already met the man you're supposed to marry, and he's an Englisher?
Oh no, you're not talking about him again, are you? Really?
Yeah, because I think you're in love with him.
Cherish giggled. Stop it. He didn't look twice at me. I think he really liked Joy.
It's just that he hasn't gotten to know you yet. I'm sure he'll fall in love with you, too.
Forget him. Even if he did join our community, I won't be anyone's second choice.
You won't be. He didn't even know us when he came to the door. Unless...
Hope leaned forward. Unless what?
He met the four of us, right?
Hope nodded.
What if I can find out from him which one of us he liked best?
How would you do that?
Ask him, silly.
Cherish popped the remainder of the cookie into her mouth. What? Hope twirled her cup strings around her fingers. You're going to his home? Knock on the door and say, hey, which of my sisters do you like the best?
No, he wants to rent the cottage.
Yeah, I know.
I've seen the cottage. It's behind the house. Knowing Florence, she would have said yes, because she likes to please people, and she's a nice person. He was pretty keen, so he would have moved in by now. I mean, he wouldn't have had far to take his things. All we have to do is knock on the door of the cottage and see how he's settling in.
All you have to do, you mean?
All right, I will. I don't mind going alone.
I don't think Mom would like that idea, you going to someone else's house. A man living by himself, and you going there alone. Hope shook her head. You've already been in dreadful trouble with the bishop.
I don't have to go into his house. I can stay outside in plain view, so everyone can see I'm not doing anything wrong. Not that I would anyway. I don't know why people think so badly of me. Anyway, what do you say?
I don't know. Don't you think it's a little weird?
What part of the plan do you think is weird?
You going to his cottage. The whole thing. Showing up at his door and asking him which one of us sisters he likes best. While you're there, you might as well ask him if he'd ever join the community. I don't want to leave the community like Florence did. Cherish bit into another cookie. Hope continued. Maybe if I was nearly 30 and had never found anybody, but I'm not. I'm not even 20, so I'm not desperate yet.
I'm sure Florence would like to know that you think she was desperate, and that's the only reason she married Carter.
Don't you dare say anything to her. I didn't mean it like that.
Do you want me to do it or not? I'm only doing it for you, of course.
Now I get it. Hope pointed at her. This is your plan, because you want to see more of him, and you want to see him for yourself.
If I liked him, I wouldn't have left it this long. I would have been at his place yesterday.
Knowing you, that's probably true. Cherish laughed at Hope, and then finished the rest of her cookie.
I wonder if he would join the community for love. Wouldn't that be romantic?
You know the bishop doesn't approve of people joining the community for love and not for God. Cherish giggled.
He'd fall in love with you first, silly, and then he'd realize that God wants him to join our community. What could be more perfect?
Okay, see what you can do, Cherish. Danke.
Don't thank me. I haven't done it yet. If you cover my chores for this afternoon and tomorrow, I can do it today.
Hope pouted. You said nothing about covering for you or doing chores.
How else would I get to see him? You know what Mom's been like about our chores lately. He could become your husband.
Cherish stared at her, blinking.
Isn't it worth it?
Okay, I'll cover for you, and I'll be praying the whole time you're away.
Good. I'll have something to eat and then I'll go see him.
She started toward the stairs.
I'll need something in my tummy besides cookies. While I'm getting changed into a clean dress, would you mind making me a sandwich?
Sure, I suppose I could. Cherish walked up the stairs, smiling to herself. She'd managed to get out of a full afternoon and a day of chores, and she would get to talk with a handsome man. What better way to spend the afternoon? Just as Cherish was heading out the door with a cheese and pickle sandwich, she saw the feed delivery wagon had arrived. One of the men helping unload the bags of horse feed was Tom. The same Tom who'd been the cause of her getting into trouble with the bishop. She looked away, kept walking, hoping he wouldn't see her. "Cherish, there you are." Looking up, she smiled at him.
Oh, Tom, it's you. Hiya.
She kept that smile fixed on her face as he hurried over. "I've just finished and was about to go. I thought you weren't home."
Here I am.
She bit into the sandwich. "I could stay and help you put the bags where they need to go." At that moment, Joy walked toward them and overheard.
Would you, Tom? That would be wunderbar. You can help too, Cherish. But I was just what?
Joy asked. She couldn't tell Joy she was going to visit the Jenkins boy, especially not in front of Tom, who still seemed to be holding on to the hope that he and Cherish had a future when she was old enough.
I was just finishing my sandwich. Hurry up and eat it then.
Joy walked back to the barn, and Tom and Cherish followed. Her plan for the day had been ruined. "How have you been, Cherish?"
Fine. And you?
"Good."
How's Isabel?
"Haven't you heard?"
Nay, heard what?
"She's getting married soon."
I didn't know. I'm sorry.
Then she recalled that she had heard that from someone. "No need to be sorry."
Good. Then I'm not.
He laughed. "You're like a breath of fresh air."
I'll change when I get older. I'll be like a stale draft.
When he laughed, she knew nothing she could say would turn him off her. Taking another bite of her sandwich, she remembered she had liked him once, and at that time he hadn't been interested in her. Then it hit her. She only liked men who didn't like her. Glancing back at the house, she saw Hope peering out the kitchen window. She shrugged her shoulders, and Hope nodded. They both knew their plan would have to be postponed. Chapter 10. With Florence and Carter's orchard not going to be planted for around 2 years, and the Jenkins family still managing the orchard they'd sold to them, Florence found herself with an abundance of time on her hands. She wasn't used to being idle. As she so often did these days, she stared out the window at the fields and imagined how it would look many years from now, when their orchard was full of blossoming apple trees, and the air was scented with the sweet fragrance of the apple blossoms. As much as Florence loved her life and loved sharing it with Carter, the adjustment to living the life of an Englisher had been huge. Not only did she miss her sisters, along with all their noise and squabbles, she even missed Wilma. Then there were her friends and all the members of the community. Now the only person she spoke with most days was Carter. Hearing footsteps, she turned around to look at him coming down the stairs. "Do you think we should get some friends?" Smiling, he walked over and kissed her cheek. "What do we need other people for?" She laughed at how funny the whole thing sounded. "For one, I'm used to living with a lot of people. And then there's—" "But don't you like being away from all that drama?" "I do." With people comes drama and disagreements. All of that makes my head spin. But not all the time. You talk with people because you're interacting with them for your business, while I'm here with Spot. Yes, and once our orchard is up and running, you'll see people too. You're only feeling like this because the summer is gone and winter is coming. It's already getting gray and cold. She sighed and looked out the window. What if I arrange a dinner here with my employees and their spouses? There are only about 30 of them, and with their spouses, that'll be around 60. They're all scattered about the place, but we could make a weekend of it. Her face lit up. She'd always wanted to get to know the people he worked with. This place is too small to have all those people for dinner. I'll put them all up in a hotel. How does that sound? You can meet them all and see if you click with anyone. You'd do that? Of course I would. We used to get together quite often, and we haven't done it in a while. Oh, I'd be so nervous about what they'd think of me. They'll love you, just like I do. And they'll get a chance to see what a lucky man I am. What are they like? I've only met Spot's old owner, and I don't even remember her name. She doesn't work for me now. She doesn't? He shook his head. No, not anymore. Isn't that strange? Not really. People come and go all the time with their jobs. I got the impression she was an important part of your team. Not really. Everybody's replaceable. Is that so? He put his arms around her. Except for you. But you already know that. She giggled. Thank you. I'm going to look forward to meeting all those people. Me too. I don't know why I didn't think of it before. Most people go away for Christmas, so I'll make it mid-January. Okay. And now I'll get myself a cup of coffee and keep working. I'll make it for you if you'd like. Sure, thanks. If you could drive, you could take the car and go somewhere. There's nowhere I need to go. I'm happy staying here. He smiled and headed back upstairs. As she walked to the kitchen, she thought more about the people from the community that she missed. It made her want to go to Joy's wedding all the more. Her 2 brothers would be there, and both of her married stepsisters. Chapter 11. Early the next morning, Cherish was planning her next move in regard to Fairfax. She and Hope were the first ones up that morning, so they hatched their plan in the kitchen.
What we need to do is wait until everybody has got the date planned, and then I can slip over to see him.
You better. That's why I did your chores yesterday and said I'd do them today.
I am. I just said so. I think he likes you. I seriously do.
Maybe we should just forget about the whole thing. You can't ask him straight out if he likes me. He probably won't even remember which one I was.
Nay, we've already decided on it. We can't be wishy-washy. Or you could always do nothing and end up marrying someone like Stephen and Jonathan's brother, and then 2 of your sisters will become your sisters-in-law.
Cherish giggled. Hope made a face. Okay, do it if you're brave enough to do it. Cherish said,
I don't have to be very brave at all. Fairfax is just a person, just a man. I won't have to ask him in an awkward way. It'll come up easily in conversation.
A very good-looking one, and an Englisher. So that makes it worse. I mean, can you imagine the fuss if I left to marry an Englisher?
It happens. Don't act like it doesn't happen all the time.
I know, but no one expects it to happen in our family.
Well, they should get used to it happening in the family because it looks like it's going to happen in the family, doesn't it?
I guess so. It already has. Florence.
I don't blame her. I can't blame her. They're such a good couple. He's perfect for her. I wonder if Florence has regrets. I'll ask next time I see her.
Nay, Cherish, don't.
Why not?
You can't ask someone something like that. What if she does? That'll make her feel so much worse. Cherish giggled.
I know she wouldn't have regrets. I was only being silly.
Mom wandered into the kitchen, wiping her eyes.
Sit down, Mom, and I'll make you a cup of coffee. Denka, but I'll drink it while I'm making the breakfast. Levi says he expects me to do the bulk of the chores, leaving you girls to get jobs. I'll get used to doing it. She looked up at the girls. Has one of you collected the eggs? I did that first thing, Hope said. Good. Cherish had to wait until after the midday meal before she headed over to see Fairfax. She was a little nervous when she had to walk into the orchard and past the Jenkins homestead to get to the cottage at the back of the yard. Nobody saw her, she hoped, so she kept on walking. She wasn't even sure he'd be home, but when she got closer, she noticed the nose of his white pickup truck peeking out from behind the cottage. She walked up the 2 porch steps and knocked on the door. When she heard footsteps coming inside, she was relieved. It had taken so much effort to get here that she didn't want to try it a second time. He opened the door and seemed pleased to see her. Ah, you're one of the Baker sisters? That's right. I'm Cherish, the youngest. He folded his arms casually in front of him and leaned against the doorpost. He hadn't asked her in, so there was no worrying about whether she should or shouldn't. What can I do for you? It was a little more awkward than she thought it might be. I just thought it was kind of weird since we're neighbors and we've never talked. Don't you? It's understandable, considering you Amish people generally keep to yourselves. You've got your own community with your own people. Why would you want to talk to me? Because we're neighbors? Oh, I didn't mean that you wouldn't want to talk with me. It was kind of a rhetorical question. Ah, one of those. I see. Well, I never did like those. He chuckled. Now she felt even more awkward and for the first time in her life didn't know what to say. Finally, he spoke. Do you want to come inside? Yes, please. Even though she'd told Hope she wouldn't go inside, she didn't think their conversation would move forward if she didn't. She'd come there to get information and couldn't leave without it. He looked around. I'm sorry, I can't even offer you anything. He pulled up a wooden box. I've only got this box to sit on. You sit here, and I'll sit on the floor. She sat on the box and crossed one leg over the other under her full dress. Then she looked around. So you don't have any furniture? Not yet. I only just moved in today, but I do plan to get some. It must be nice to have a place of your own, she commented as she looked around. All of your very own. I've never lived alone. Me neither. I've always lived with my folks. How old are you? 20. Before your parents sold the place to Carter and my sister, what did you do with this cottage? It was vacant. That is so weird. I mean, why would you do nothing with it when it could be earning money? I don't know. I think we always meant to do something with it, but didn't get around to it because of the demands of the orchard and everything. Yes, I know all about the demands of an orchard. She drummed her fingers on the side of the wooden box. Can I offer you a drink? I've got beer or cider. No, thank you. I'm sorry, Cherish, I don't mean to be rude, but is there a reason you're here? Things escalated from awkward to extremely so. I'm just being friendly. She leaned forward. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but she was there and she couldn't waste the moment. The straightforward approach was the only way to go. Do you have a girlfriend? He nearly choked. Do you want the job? Oh, no, I'm not. No, but there could be one of my sisters who could possibly be interested. And I'm just saying possibly because I haven't talked to her about it yet. He gave an embarrassed laugh. You think one of your sisters likes me? That's right. So I was just wondering what your opinion was. He couldn't stop smiling. Which sister is it? Which one do you think? Which one would you like it to be? You're all beautiful. She gave a giggle. Thank you. I mean it. I'm not just saying it. I know. I believe you. He took a deep breath. I'm glad you cleared that up. I asked Joy if she would go out with me. Forget Joy. She's getting married. He nodded. I know. I found that out. Well? She leaned forward. Well, what? Was there another one that took your eye?
Another of your sisters besides Joy? She nodded. He rubbed his chin. It would have to be the tall one.
I knew it. The two of you would be perfect together.
Maybe, if she wasn't Amish. Thinking about Florence and Carter, she said,
It's not a problem.
Well, it is to me. It is a problem. She sighed and stood up. It was a waste of her time, but at least she'd gotten out of some chores.
If you're going to change your mind, don't take too long. Girls like her don't stay single for long.
What's her name?
Hope, and she's very nice. She's probably the nicest of all my sisters, but don't tell the others that.
He smiled and stood up as well. I won't. As he walked to the door, he said, Maybe next time you visit, I'll have a chair for you to sit on. She turned around to face him.
There won't be a next time.
He looked taken aback, and then she walked through the door.
Goodbye.
He stood at the edge of the porch and called after her, You're my first visitor. She turned and said,
Good. I like being first. I'm very competitive.
He grinned at her, and then she turned and kept walking away. Things with Fairfax had been more awkward than she thought, but at least she tried. That was better than sitting at home eating cookies and wondering. When she got closer to home, she saw Hope walking to meet her. If only she had better news to give her.
What did he say? Did you talk with him? He likes you the best. The only thing is...
She pulled on Cherish's arm. What? What's the only thing?
You're Amish, and he doesn't want a girlfriend who's Amish.
Oh, that's too bad.
Not really. You can't have an English boyfriend, silly.
I know that, but that doesn't mean he won't join us someday.
No, he didn't sound like he had any interest in joining us at all. I can't think why.
Thanks for trying anyway.
You're welcome. I'm sorry things didn't work out for you. Maybe you'll meet someone at Joy's wedding after all.
I hope so. I don't want to get married for a few years, maybe 2, but it would be nice to know who I'm going to marry, don't you think?
I do. I know what you mean.
The 2 girls walked back to the house. Joy said nothing to her mother about asking Florence to the wedding. Then she realized what Mom was doing. She was leaving it to the very last minute, hoping Florence couldn't come at short notice. There was nothing that could be done. No one could force her mother to ask Florence, but if Mom didn't ask her, Joy would. It was early in the morning when Florence heard a knock on the door. Carter was sleeping in after a late-night conference call, so she hurried to answer it before they knocked twice. Standing before her was Wilma, looking ever so humble. Chapter 12. All Florence could do was stare open-mouthed at Wilma, trying to work out why her stepmother was there. Had she come to get to know her only son, or to apologize for all the nasty things she'd said and done? When she realized her mouth was open, she closed it, but she still couldn't find words. Wilma was the first to speak. Now, don't ask me to leave. I'm just coming here to ask you if you would come to Joy's wedding, December 7th? Florence was thankful and sent up a silent prayer. She'd see all of her sisters there. I'd be delighted to come to her wedding. Thank you. Don't thank me. It's Joy who wants you to be there. Even though Wilma wasn't being gracious about it, Florence wasn't bothered. Joy wanted her there, and that was enough. I'm happy to be invited.
I'm getting married a few days later. I don't want you to come to my wedding.
Florence looked away from her, sad that things had come to this. She wouldn't have gone unless she'd been asked, but to hear Wilma say the words that she didn't want her there was heartbreaking. Isn't there some way we could be friends, Wilma? Maybe, after some time? She desperately wanted to tell Wilma she'd found her biological grandmother and show her photos of her mother before she'd come to the community. Yes, Wilma had faults, But she was still the only mother Florence remembered, and she wanted to hang on to that for as long as she could.
I'm sorry, but you've made your choice. The word says we can't mix with outsiders, and you've done just that. You're an outsider now yourself, thanks to your decision. You've only got yourself to blame.
I know I have, but some people do still talk to their family members after they've left the community.
Many do not. I choose not to. For one thing, I don't like the way you and Carter tricked me.
Florence couldn't help being irritated. Tricked you into what?
He should have approached me and told me who he was, instead of sneaking about and living next door and splashing money about, buying up all the surrounding land. Now you're—
Florence remembered that Wilma thought they were starting in competition against her. He just bought those other places for me so we could—
Go on.
Wilma leaned forward. If I can't run the orchard, then what's the harm if I create one of my own with Carter?
You'll cut into our profits. That's what's the harm.
I don't see that's possible. I won't approach any of your customers if that's what you're worried about. It'll be years before we—
I'm not worried about anything. I've got Levi to look after the girls and me now. Besides, it's all in God's hands.
It didn't sound to Florence as though Wilma wasn't worried. It seemed as though she was bitter, jealous, and twisted. What I'm trying to say is that Carter didn't do anything wrong. He just wanted to be close to you since Iris died.
Why would you mention Iris to me?
Iris was Carter's mother, that's why. And I'm explaining to you why he bought this place. He wasn't even going to make contact. That was never his intention. He never wanted anything from you. He only wanted to feel a sense of belonging somewhere, to someone who would feel familiar. He had no family left in the world until he married me.
I wouldn't have been familiar to him, so what you're saying doesn't make any sense, Florence.
Wilma curled her hands and placed her fists onto her hips. Anyway, the orchard won't be planted until next year, and maybe not even until the year after. So don't worry.
Why's that?
The ground and the soil have to be prepared properly.
Are you lying to me?
Wilma narrowed her eyes.
Can't you just plant the trees?
No. I'm taking advice from one of Dot's friends who's experienced in setting up orchards.
Sounds like some tall tales. I'll talk to Eric Brosley myself.
Okay, he's the man who's helping us. There's a lot that has to go into it. Soil testing and the like. Things I knew nothing about. It's been a learning experience. They looked at one another for a moment. Florence said, "Thank you for inviting me to Joy's wedding. I'd really like to come. And I'm looking forward to seeing Honor and Mercy, too. You'll soon be a grossmommy."
Yes, I will. Finally. Anyway, that's the only reason I came.
Florence noticed Wilma glance into the cottage. Was she hoping Carter might be home? Carter's upstairs, still asleep. He was working until late in the night. Wilma gave a little nod, turned around, and hurried away. She didn't even say goodbye. In sadness, Florence stood there and watched her leave. Still, it was a step forward that she'd been personally invited to Joy's wedding. Otherwise, being an outsider, she never could have gone. Florence shut the door, delighted with that tiny victory. And then she sat down with Spot and wondered what to give Joy and Isaac as a wedding gift. Chapter 13. When Mom walked into the kitchen after talking with Florence, Cherish was up to her elbows in flour, making bread. She was determined to get on her mother's good side to get a positive response about visiting her farm.
That was fast. Is she coming to the wedding?
Yeah, she is. Joy will be happy about that. Wilma headed over to fill the tea kettle with water.
I know you're busy with the wedding and everything, but I really need to go to the farm to keep an eye on it. After the wedding and before Christmas. Would that be possible? Please say yes. Don't trouble me about it now. I've got a lot on my mind. I wasn't expecting to have Matthew stay here. I had enough going on, and now I'll have him under my feet. But things are best planned when you're busy, aren't they? I can't even think about it now. Ask me again another time.
She lit the stove and placed the kettle over the flame.
No, I don't think I could think about that until sometime next year. It's time. It's time I visit the farm. I need to look after the farm for Dagmar, and don't you owe it to Dagmar? Nay, that's why you have a caretaker. If you don't trust him, get someone else. You only just got back. I can't think about it until the new year, and I can't keep paying for a driver to take you back to the farm 6 times a year. I'll only go 3 times a year, just to keep an eye on the place. We simply don't have the money. Because we didn't get much for the harvest this year, things aren't as good as we were expecting.
Cherish was quiet about that. She knew it was Levi's fault for leaving the apples on the trees for several days longer than they should have been, allowing them to overripen and begin to rot. It grated on her to her very last nerve that Levi had taken over the orchard that had been her father's. It felt like Levi was trying to take his place.
Well, let's hope we don't have the same thing happen next year. Anyway, I can pay for myself out of what I get at the coffee shop.
That will change after I marry Levi. Cherish's face lit up.
You mean I won't have to work anymore?
Had Levi changed his mind about the girls working outside the home?
I mean, you having money will change. Levi will give you each an allowance, and all the wages you girls earn will go to the running of the household.
Wilma stood in front of the stove, warming her back. Cherish gulped. Her mother had to be joking. Bliss had told the girls her father had said they'd all need jobs, but this was going too far. Surely her mother had gotten things wrong.
How's that fair? You're living here under this roof and eating the food, and you are getting everything supplied for you, so it is fair. I don't see how. I'd be better off living somewhere else. You can live wherever you like when you're old enough, but right now you're not old enough to do anything that you want to do. I still find it unforgivable that Dagmar left the farm only to you. We could have sold it and then used the money to help us get through hard times. I'm never selling it.
Cherish dusted some flour off her hands.
So are you saying that I can visit the farm if I use my own money?
I suppose so. We could all use a break from you. Are you going to talk Florence into going with you again?
I was thinking of it, if she can. Then we could all stay at the farmhouse.
Mom clicked her tongue. If she can't go with you, you could always stay with Bishop Zachariah.
Yes, I could. I'm sure he wouldn't mind. I could even stay with Ruth next door.
The bishop would be the better option out of the two.
Yes, of course. Good idea. I'd like to go the next day after your wedding. How does that sound?
Are you sure you have the money saved for a driver if Florence can't take you?
I will have by then.
Very well, then.
Don't you have to check with your boss first?
Her mother wagged her finger at her. As soon as I marry Levi, he'll be the head of this household, and you better get used to it. I don't think he'll take kindly to your smart mouth, so you should think about that before you open it when he's around.
Thanks for the warning, Mom.
She leaned forward with her floured hands in the air and hugged her mother. At first, Wilma was stiff, but then she relaxed and hugged Cherish back. Chapter 14. Once Cherish had left the bread dough near the warm oven to rise, she headed upstairs to pen a quick letter to Malachi. She was certain Florence and Carter would drive her back to the farm. They seemed to enjoy it last time. She pulled out the box under her bed and took out her pen and notepaper. The notepaper had been a present from Joy last Christmas. It was scented with lavender, and she hoped it wouldn't send the wrong message to Malachi. Of course, she could always borrow some of Favor's notepaper, But that had flowers on it and was probably just as bad. She took 2 pieces of paper, grabbed her Bible to support them, and then sat at the end of her bed to write. Dear Malachi, I hope you are well and keeping up with all your duties on the farm. I am coming there soon to see how everything is coming along. I have my sister getting married early in December, and then my mother is marrying a few days after that. The next day, I'll be coming there with my sister Florence and her husband Carter. Like we already talked about, I hope you haven't made too many changes. I was very happy with the fence you fixed. You do some things right. I don't want you to think I'm complaining all the time. It just upsets me when you make changes. So don't make any unless it's things like the fence. Changes like that are good. In future, if you want to make any changes, just ask me. Then I won't get upset when I find out what you've done. How are the animals? Yours faithfully, Cherish. She wasn't sure what else to write, and she hoped that would be enough. It was nothing that she hadn't already told him before. He knew he couldn't make changes willy-nilly. She addressed and stamped an envelope, folded and inserted the letter, and sealed it. The bread. Taking the letter with her, she went downstairs to check if the bread dough was ready to bake. 2.5 weeks passed before Cherish got a reply from Malachi. Joy had come in the door and handed the letter to her when she was peeling vegetables for the family's dinner. She read through it and was immediately annoyed. Leaving the shelling of the peas to someone else, she ran upstairs to find Favor.
What are you doing?
Favor glared at her from her bed where she'd been lying down.
Please knock next time.
Cherish groaned.
Sorry, but you won't believe what he wrote.
Who?
The idiot of a caretaker. Malachi? That's the only one I have. Listen to this.
She looked down at the note.
Dear Charity.
She looked over at Favor, who was now sitting up.
Can you believe it? He's doing it deliberately. He knows very well what my name is. Why did he write to you at all? Because I wrote to him. About? I had to tell him I was coming there soon. He never answers the phone in the barn. I don't know why I have to pay for the connection.
Cherish shook her head in disgust.
What else does he say in the letter? Not much of anything, but he called me Charity.
Favor nodded.
Wouldn't you be annoyed if someone called you Flower instead of Favor? Or how about Flavor? That's a good one. No, not really. It wouldn't bother me. No one can remember my name anyway. I'm a calmer person than you, and I don't get as easily upset. He's deliberately provoking me. He just doesn't like me.
Cherish could visualize him smirking as he wrote that letter, knowing that it would send prickles of irritation rippling under her skin.
Sounds like he's annoyed with you. I'm the one who's annoyed. I'm annoyed with him. He doesn't even say, "How are you? I hope you're well." And he doesn't even say, "Yours faithfully" or "Yours truly," or anything about God. He just says nothing and just puts his name there at the end. It's rude. That's what it is. What did you say in your last letter? Not much. I just told him not to change anything on the farm any further than he already has. Don't write to him again.
Cherish waved the letter in the air.
That's it. That's exactly what he wants. He wants me not to bother writing. I'm going to write twice as many letters now. Can I borrow some of your flower notepaper? Sure. How many sheets? Just 2.
Favor reached into the box under her bed and ripped off 2 sheets of notepaper. Cherish grabbed them out of Favor's outstretched hand and hurried to her room to write. At first, she couldn't think of what to write, and then her hand was moving quickly. First off, she told him she knew he mixed up her name deliberately, and then she proceeded to give him a further list of instructions. She finished by telling him she might get Ruth from next door to check on him, knowing he'd hate that. At the end, she simply wrote her name, the same as he'd done. If he was going to do away with politeness, so would she. She licked the envelope and closed it, headed downstairs and propped it on the table by the door, so the next person going into town could mail it. Chapter 15.
They're here,
Cherish called out from her upstairs bedroom. It was 2 days before Joy's wedding, and they were all waiting for Matthew to be brought to the house, and in the same car they were expecting to see Honor and Mercy before they were taken to Ada's house. As soon as she'd yelled, Caramel and Goldie ran around the room and jumped up at her. "Settle down now, settle!" She raced down the stairs, followed by the dogs, to find her mother. "They're here, Mom!" Mom walked out of the kitchen. "I heard you the first time. Put the dogs away, would you?" "I'll close them in my room." Cherish raced back up the stairs, clapping her hands so the dogs would follow. Her mother opened the front door and looked out. "I can't see them," she yelled to Cherish. Cherish called back, "I saw the car at the end of the road." Once the dogs were in the room, Cherish closed them in and hurried back to wait for her 2 older sisters. She was more excited than normal because of them both being pregnant. Cherish and Wilma waited on the porch for the car Cherish had seen, but none came. Soon they saw a lone figure walking toward the house. It was Matthew, her brother-in-law's brother. She knew her mother would be devastated that her daughters had gone on to Ada's without stopping in to say hello. "He's here alone." Favor walked up beside them. "What's going on?" "Matthew's walking up the driveway. The others must have gone directly on to Ada's," Cherish said, while Mom stayed quiet. "Seems like it," Mom said a moment later. "Both of you hitch the buggy. We'll drive over to Ada's right now. I'm not going to miss out on seeing my girls today. I was looking forward to it." Cherish was pleased to see her mother so decisive. She so often drifted along, blown about in the wind like a dried-out, discarded leaf from one of their apple trees. "Sure thing, Mom. Come on, Favor." Together the girls hurried to the barn. "Hey," Matthew called out, waving. They waved back, but kept heading to the barn. With his duffel bag slung over his back, he broke into a jog. "Hey, wait up." They stopped and waited for him to catch up. "Don't tell me you're going out just when I arrive." Favor answered, "Yeah, we're going out because Honor and Mercy aren't here." "They didn't come in the same car. They came in a different car." "Why's that?" "Think about it. There are 4 of them, one of me, and the driver. How many do we have?" "6," Favor said. "Oh, a car can only seat 5?" "Correct. Usually, anyway. Unless we pay a lot more. And it was cheaper to have 2 cars." There's your answer.
"That doesn't make sense," Favor said.
"Well, that's the way things are." He adjusted his bag that seemed to be dragging his shoulder down. "Where are the others?"
"Favor, go and break the bad news to Mom."
When Favor ran off toward the house, Matthew frowned. "Hey, I'm here." Cherish shook her head.
"Yeah, that'll make up for her not seeing her 2 doctors that she hasn't seen in months."
"Will it?" he asked hopefully.
"Nay, it won't."
"It is still okay I stay here, isn't it?" Cherish felt bad for saying what she had.
"Of course. Don't say anything to your brothers, but Mom said you were her favorite out of all of you in your family."
"Is that so?" His face beamed.
"Yeah. She said you've got a sensible head on your shoulders and you're kind and smart. Come on, let's say hello to Mom. She's waiting anxiously to see you. Favor and I made peanut butter cookies this morning, and we've still got some left."
"Wunderbar. They're my favorite. I knew I'd get some good food here." They kept walking to the house. They couldn't make up their mind what time they were coming, so I just went ahead and booked on my own. When they walked through the door, Cherish told him to leave his duffel bag, and then she took him into the kitchen. Mom got up from the kitchen table, and Cherish saw she had red-rimmed eyes, but nobody else would have noticed, due to the fake smile she plastered on her face. "Wie geht's, Matthew?" "I'm good. And how are you?"
"Fine."
She took hold of his hand and led him over to the table. "Sit here. The girls will fix you something. Did you have a long drive?" Before he could answer, Cherish said,
"Did you hear Honor and Mercy weren't in that car? They're coming in a different car, hours later. Matthew doesn't know when."
"I know, but Matthew's here, and I'm so pleased you could stay with us. You can help the men with the benches and the tables on the wedding day." I'll help in any way I can. And before that, I can do any jobs around the place that you want." When Mom smiled, Cherish knew that this smile was genuine. They did have a lot of small jobs that needed to be done. Florence had always seen to those using Dot's old tools. She sat down while Favor served everyone milk and cookies. Chapter 16. After the milk and cookies, Wilma had Favor call the phone in Ada's barn to ask her to bring the girls and their husbands to her house as soon as they arrived, and to ask if they could all stay on for an early evening meal. Ada agreed to both parts of Wilma's request. It was 4 in the afternoon when 2 of Ada's husband's buggies came up the drive headed to the house. Mom hollered to everyone that the girls were here. Everyone in the household, including the 2 dogs, waited to meet them. Honor was first to step out, followed by Mercy. "Look at the both of you. About to make me a grossmummy 2 times over." The girls hugged their mother, and soon their husbands stood next to them, while Ada and Samuel secured the horses. As soon as their mother was busy greeting the husbands, the 4 younger Baker sisters swarmed Honor and Mercy, talking at a million beats per minute. "I cooked for us all," said Joy, as they all made their way inside. "Are Bliss and Levi coming?" Ada asked Wilma. "They'll be here soon." Joy was filled with happiness when she and Hope placed the food on the table for everyone who had gathered. Most of her family were there, and the rest would be at her wedding the day after tomorrow. Joy was waiting for Stephen to tell his jokes, but he didn't. He did tease Isaac about changing his mind, though. Isaac shook his head. "Never. Although I have been worried about Joy changing her mind." Joy gulped, feeling a little guilty about being attracted to Fairfax. "I won't. Besides, it's all arranged." Jonathan chuckled. "We can turn it into a celebration of mind changing." Honor slapped him lightly on his arm. "Don't say that." "They know I'm joking." When Timmy squawked loudly, Wilma glared at Cherish. "It's okay. I'll tell him it's nighttime." Cherish got up from the table and covered his cage with the sheet. "It was Dagmar's bird," Wilma explained to everyone, "and Cherish insisted on bringing it home." "I had a bird once," said Stephen. Everyone looked at him, expecting him to say something else. Then he said, "It spent a lot of time on its knees. Do you know what it was called?" "What?" asked Samuel. "A bird of prey." Samuel laughed, and most of the guests chuckled. Mercy, who could never understand her husband's jokes, sat there shaking her head. Stephen wasn't deterred. He looked at Joy. "Here's one for you, Joy, and you too, Isaac. Why did the doves miss the wedding?" Joy and Isaac looked at one another. "I don't know. Why?" Isaac asked. "Because they were under the feather." Stephen laughed. "It doesn't make sense," Mercy said. "You know, doves always put their head under their wings," Jonathan explained. Mercy shrugged her shoulders. Levi said, "I think we've had enough of the jokes. Danka, Stephen." Stephen nodded, and everyone went quiet. Joy couldn't help being annoyed with Levi. Even though she wasn't a fan of jokes, at least everyone was happy, and sometimes they were a little bit funny. Now the mood wasn't so jovial. "Last one," Samuel said, in defiance of Levi's law. "I remember a bird joke from Shul. What is smarter than a talking bird?" He looked around at everyone. No one knew. "A spelling bee." Even Joy laughed, and she laughed louder than she normally would have, because she was still upset at how Levi had talked to Stephen. He didn't make the rules in the house, not until he was married to Wilma, and even then he had to show respect for their guests. And Stephen was more than a guest, being Wilma's son-in-law. With both Honor and Mercy being pregnant, it wasn't long after the meal ended that they grew weary. Ada suggested they leave for an early night and visit again the next day. Isaac was the last of the guests to leave. Joy suffered through the chill of the night air on the porch so they could speak alone before he left. "Were you upset with Stephen teasing you?" He chuckled. It takes more than that to upset me. And I'm sorry I didn't back you up in front of Wilma the other day. I know you're still upset about it, and I've been giving it a lot of thought.
Good. I'm glad we sorted that out.
He chuckled. Women are funny. Men are more straightforward.
In what way?
If you were a man, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
If I was a man, we wouldn't be getting married the day after tomorrow.
They both laughed. That's true. Isaac took hold of Joy's hand. Next time, if there is a next time that I do anything to upset you, you must tell me straight away. Don't take days. Her teeth chattered in the cold.
I didn't think you understood.
He put both arms around her to keep her warm. Then I want you to help me understand if there's a next time. I wanted to keep Wilma happy since I'll be moving in after our wedding. Do you still want to marry me? A foolish man like me?
I do. The date is set and everything.
If you're not sure, Joy, you can change your mind. Doesn't matter that the date's set.
You're not changing your mind, are you, Isaac?
No, I'm not. Never. I've been looking forward to this since the day I met you. She leaned forward and kissed him on his icy cheek. That was just what she needed to hear. Now she knew that all her doubts had been over nothing. Go inside, get warm. I love you, Joy.
I love you too.
They shared a quick kiss on the lips before he led her closer to the front door. When they parted and she stepped back into the warmth of the house, she could barely believe that they'd soon be man and wife. She couldn't wait. Chapter 17. It was a cold December morning on the day of Joy's wedding. Florence was overcome with emotion. She'd not been involved with Joy's wedding like she'd been involved with the others. At this wedding, she'd be an outsider, not one of the family. She stood at the open wardrobe, gazing at her clothes, and wondered what would be the most suitable, or the least unsuitable, she thought wryly. After she made some choices, she stepped into her longest skirt, pulled on her plainest blouse, and then fluffed out her shoulder-length hair. Then she walked downstairs and saw Carter on the couch, balancing his laptop on his knees. "Are you sure you don't want to come with me?" "I will if you really want me to, but I barely know Joy." "You really don't want to go, do you?" "Not particularly." He grimaced. "There'll be a lot of good food there. There's always plenty of it, too. Bring some back for me." She giggled. "Okay." "I'd stick out like a sore thumb. I'd be the big bad Englisher who's stolen you away and forced you to marry me. It would be really awkward." "Okay, you stay here." "Good, thanks," he chuckled. "I've got a lot of work I can get done today. Spot and I will walk you down to the fence line, unless you want me to drive you to the front of the house." "There's no need. I'll just walk." He stood up and said, "Okay, Spot and I will walk with you." Spot knew what the word walk meant, and he immediately jumped off the couch and headed to the door. They went down the porch steps with Spot beside them. "Are you looking forward to it?" "I am. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone. Well, most people. I'm hoping people won't judge me too harshly." "Do they normally allow outsiders at their weddings?" "Yes, normally at the weddings there are at least a couple of outsiders. It's not unusual." "And you weren't shunned?" "No. I never got baptized, so I never officially joined. It was always something I was going to do before I got married, but I thought I would get married much younger and to someone in the community." "I'm glad you didn't." "Me too. But just because I wasn't a full member doesn't mean that some people won't refuse to talk to me, and I know some will turn their backs." He nodded. "I understand." "It sounds like the Amish are a lot of judgmental people who follow rigid rules. I guess we do. They do. But it's not exactly like that. The community is not full of nastiness and rules. It's not." He looked at her and raised his eyebrows. "I believe you." "There's a lot of love there. Everyone watches out for one another like one big family. It sounds like the ideal existence. It can be. It's just that sometimes the rules get in the way of the love. They reached the fence line, and she gave him a hug, and he held her tight. I won't see you for a while, then. It'll be a few hours, or it might be only a few minutes if things don't go well. Okay. Don't let your head be turned by a handsome Amish man. She giggled. I definitely won't. You've no need to worry. I'm happy with what I've got. He grinned. That was the right answer. Hey, you forgot the present. No, I didn't plan to take the gift to the wedding. No one does that. I'll give it to them later. Okay. She'd gotten them a variety of linen for their future house when they moved into it. It was a practical present because Joy was a practical girl. He lifted the wires so she could slip through the fence easily, and then they grinned at each other over the fence before she made her way into the orchard. As she wandered through the trees, she was hoping it would be hers again one day. All she had to do was wait. Wait until Levi drove the place into the ground and drove the family broke and ruined the orchard. Then she could step in to save it. And, she hoped, the family. The weather had been mild so far for early winter, and she hoped for the sake of the apple trees that there would be a true cold snap. That's what the apples needed over the winter months. When she saw the house where she had grown up, her nerves kicked in and her heart rate sped up. It would be awkward talking to some of the folk, and she really didn't know what she might say. She heard a squeal and looked over at the back of the house. It was Cherish. She'd spotted her coming, and she was telling Honor and Mercy. All fear left, and Florence quickened her pace to see the girls who were now hurrying toward her. When they reached each other, Florence stretched out her arms and wrapped them about both girls. I've missed you both so much. Florence could only croak the words as she held back tears. When they had been babies, she'd changed their diapers, fed them, and carried them around as though they were hers. She did feel as though she was a second mother to her half-sisters. She stepped back and looked at their bellies. Congratulations to both of you. I'm due first, I'm quite sure, Honor said. Mercy shook her head. It's really about the same time. There's no way to know the exact time anyone's going to be born. Florence giggled with pleasure to be back around the carefree banter of the girls. Cherish walked over and hugged Florence. Had Cherish just given them a moment alone without being loud and noisy? It seemed so, and that meant that she was growing up a little. Did Jonathan and Stephen come?
Of course they did.
I can't wait to see them. You're brave coming here, Honor said. Florence took a deep breath. Has anyone said anything bad about me? Do I have to be careful about anyone? Honor and Mercy exchanged glances. Well, Ada's not very happy. With me? All the reasons that Ada could have been mad at Florence raced through her head. Was it because she left to marry an outsider, or because she didn't marry the man Ada had chosen for her? Yeah, said Honor. She's never recovered from you not marrying Ezekiel. Florence's fingers flew to her throat. I hope he's not coming here today. He's not here already, is he?
I don't know.
Cherish looked over her shoulder.
He might be.
She sighed, wishing the Amish sent out wedding invitations and requested RSVPs. It would make avoiding people much easier. Whoever showed up, and that was seriously everyone around. Everyone near and far traveled to be there. How's Joy? Florence asked the girls. Honor said, she's a little nervous. She hasn't come out of her— Cherish interrupted.
She's upstairs. Let's get into the warmth of the house.
Florence was ushered into the house before she could put up too much of a protest. She definitely didn't want to bump into her stepmother or Levi or Ada. 3 people she knew weren't happy with her. There were most likely others, too, but she wouldn't feel so bad about disappointing them. With a sister on each arm, she walked through the door of the house where she had grown up. Everything was still the same. Somehow, she had expected it to be different. The only thing different was she.
This way,
Said Cherish, now leading the way to the stairs. Before they got to the bedroom, they heard Bliss's voice. She was talking to Joy. And then they heard Bliss giggling loudly. When they opened the door, they saw Bliss doing up the ties of Joy's apron. Joy turned around and saw Florence standing in the doorway. She ran to her and grabbed both of her hands.
You came.
She hugged her.
I'm so glad you did.
I said I would. I told Wilma I would.
I know, but I wasn't sure. I'm so unsure about everything these days.
Not Isaac, I hope, Bliss said before she bellowed maniacal laughter. Florence stared at Bliss. She'd known the girl was loud and boisterous, but not this bad. How would the girls cope with living with her when she moved in after Levi married Wilma?
Earl's here, too. He stopped by and saw me yesterday. He didn't stay long.
I'm looking forward to seeing him. You look beautiful, Joy.
Tinka.
And who sewed your dress?
Christina did it.
She did a wonderful job.
Dinka. Oh, Florence, we still have your mother's sewing machine here.
I know. I must get that sometime. I'll buy the family a new one, a gas-powered one.
You don't need to, said Bliss. I have 2 sewing machines, and all our furniture and everything is coming here.
It will be a bit crowded, won't it? Asked Florence.
Wilma is storing her things in the barn until they're sold.
We're selling our furniture? Asked Joy.
No one told me that.
Cherish shook her head. Joy sighed. Aw, we'll miss our old furniture. How does Wilma feel about that? Bliss stared at Florence.
All right, I guess. Why wouldn't she? It makes sense to keep the newest and the best furniture, and that is the furniture that we have.
Mercy said, Maybe Mom will give you and Isaac the furniture for when you have a home of your own.
Or sell some of it to Joy,
Bliss added. Florence bit her tongue and didn't say any more. She didn't have to live with Bliss and Levi, but she certainly did feel sorry for her half-sisters who did. Maybe a tiny bit sorry for Wilma, too. It didn't sound like life in this house was going to be much fun. Chapter 18. Cherish and Florence went out of the house, leaving Joy to finish getting ready. They walked closer to the barn and then saw Mercy and Honor's husbands with their brother Matthew talking. Stephen was Mercy's husband and the oldest brother. Jonathan was Honor's. Florence had been against Jonathan and didn't think he was a very reliable character, but hopefully she was wrong about him. As they both walked over to her, looking happier than ever, Cherish took the moment to leave her. Then, almost at the same time, each of the brothers kissed her on the cheek. Last of all, Matthew stepped in and put out his hand. While she shook it, she stared at him. "You've grown so much. I hardly knew it was you." He laughed. "I didn't recognize you at first, either. Not in those clothes. We hear you got married." Jonathan looked her up and down. "This is a change." Florence laughed. "Well, it is still me." "You're looking good, Florence," Jonathan said. "Thank you. I hope you're both looking after my girls?" Stephen nodded. "We certainly are." "That's good." "And you'll be an aunt soon," Stephen said. ×2. "I know. I'm looking forward to it. I hope I get to see them." "We won't be stopping you," Jonathan assured her. "Yeah, we won't stop them seeing you," Stephen chuckled. "That reminds me of a joke." Jonathan gave him a playful shove. "It's a wedding. It's not the place for jokes." "I could say something, but I won't," Matthew grinned. "Please don't." Jonathan frowned at the younger brother. Suddenly, Florence remembered all the jokes Stephen used to tell over dinner when he was visiting Mercy. How could she have forgotten?
Did your husband let you out by yourself? Jonathan smirked at Florence.
He had to work today.
I was hoping we'd all get to meet him.
Maybe another time. Are you staying on for Wilma's wedding?
We are. Stephen and I are staying at Ada's with Honor and Mercy, of course, and Matthew is staying with the Bakers.
Oh, I thought Mercy and Honor would stay with Mom.
Nay, that's what Ada arranged.
Ada?
Florence knew Wilma wouldn't be happy about that. Yeah.
We're leaving the day after Wilma gets married. The night of the wedding, Matthew will be staying with Ada, too. Ah, Ada's worked out everything.
Florence, you met your husband when his cows broke into your orchard, didn't you?
That's right.
Mercy told me that's how it happened. She thought it was romantic, and I told her anything involving cows could never be romantic. I've got a joke about cows. Want to hear it?
She fixed a smile on her face. Sure.
No, she doesn't, Matthew said. No one wants to hear your silly jokes that aren't even funny.
He looked around.
Has anyone seen Hope? I think I saw her walking into the house. They do so want to hear my jokes. She said she does.
Without responding, Matthew excused himself and walked away.
Jonathan stood there smirking while Stephen continued. What do you call a sleeping cow?
Florence did her best to look interested.
I don't know. A bulldozer.
He laughed at his own joke, but then Jonathan dug him in the ribs.
There is a difference between bulls and cows, you know.
Stephen placed his hand on Jonathan's shoulder.
Relax, it's just a joke.
Jonathan shrugged his shoulders and then picked up his brother's hand and moved it away.
I've got some more cow jokes. They're utterly amazing.
Stephen laughed again and held his stomach.
Jonathan shook his head. Florence doesn't think that's funny. Maybe my jokes are going in one ear and out the other. Sounds like a lot of bull to me, Jonathan chuckled. Stephen stopped laughing and frowned at him. Hey, I do the jokes. All your jokes are ones you heard from me when I was 8. Stephen smoothed down his dark beard. I taught you all the jokes you know.
Florence cleared her throat. If you'll excuse me, I need to say hello to someone. She rushed away before they could say one more word. How did Mercy and Honor put up with them when the 4 of them were together? Just when she was looking for someone to speak with, while avoiding the oversight as well as Wilma and Ada, she saw Matthew again. He was walking toward her away from the house, looking distressed. She stood still, and he looked up and saw her and walked over to her.
They said Hope wasn't there, and I was told she was in the house.
Who said she wasn't?
Bliss.
Ah, Bliss. She'll soon be the girl's stepsister.
Can I say something, Florence, and get your opinion?
As long as it doesn't start or end with a joke.
He chuckled. It doesn't. Don't worry.
Florence smiled.
She guessed his gloomy face had something to do with Hope.
Go right ahead.
I figure if Jonathan can talk a swell girl like Honor into marrying him, I can get Hope to marry me. What do you think?
I don't know what Mom would say. She's already lost 2 girls. She might want to keep the rest closer to home.
I'd move for Hope. I'd do anything for her. Will you put in a good word?
Florence stifled a giggle at his enthusiasm.
Maybe Hope was fond of him, too. He was sweet, and he didn't tell jokes.
I'll talk with her.
Would you, Florence?
She nodded.
That'd be swell.
I'll do what I can. Then she caught sight of her former best friend, Liza. I've got a friend I need to see, and then I'll look for Hope. She walked away from Matthew and hoped Liza would speak with her. It would be dreadfully awkward if she didn't. Liza had said she couldn't be friends with her any longer, and that had hurt deeply. Liza looked up at her and smiled, sending a flood of relief coursing through Florence. That stopped when Simon, Liza's husband, walked up to her with their 2 children. Not sure what to do since Simon had told his wife she could no longer be friends with her, Florence stopped still and smiled at Simon. He gave her a quick nod and then turned away, taking their 2 children with him. Just when Florence was deliberating what to do, someone spoke behind her.
I didn't think you'd come.
She spun around to face Ada, Wilma's closest friend. I told Wilma I'd be here.
Ezekiel Troyer, remember him?
Yes, I do. How could she forget the pig farmer she'd tried to make herself fall in love with? Then she hoped Ada wasn't going to tell her that he was there.
He's getting married.
Is he?
That's right. It's a shame you couldn't make it work with him. He would have been a good husband to you. But instead, you chose another path.
Florence didn't like the way Ada put her down whenever she had the opportunity. I didn't really choose the path. I fell in love with someone.
Pumpkins might fly. What happened when the Canaanites intermarried with another race?
Just because he's not of the Amish faith doesn't make him of another race.
You know what I mean. The same reasoning applies. He shouldn't have even been under consideration as a husband, or even a close friend.
She didn't want to get into an argument with Ada, but she felt like she had to stand her ground and make her point. She was tired of being bullied. My husband and I have such a strong attachment, I didn't want to turn my back on it. I don't think I would be happy if I married anyone else, and I'm glad I didn't.
Ada's eyebrows flew up, nearly touching the edge of her prayer cup. It's blasphemous, and you turn up here today as though nothing has happened.
Joy is my sister, and she wanted me here.
Joy is a very polite girl, and she is so sweet that she would hate to hurt anybody's feelings. No one expected you to show up here. Aren't you embarrassed?
No more embarrassed than anybody else here at the wedding. I came here to see my sister get married, not to discuss religious viewpoints.
You broke Wilma's heart.
I'm sure Wilma doesn't think about me. I'm sure I'm the last thing on her mind since she's about to marry Levi. Florence looked around and then said to Ada, "Aren't you worried that you'll ruin your reputation by speaking to me?"
Nay, I'm not, because I still care about you, Florence. I'll tell them that I'm trying to help you back on the narrow path.
Is that what you're doing?
I am. There is still time to save your soul if you come back to us and repent. Get baptized and join us as a full member. Then when you die, you can rest in peace that you will know where you're going. You'll see your mother and your father once more.
Ada cast her gaze down to the cold earth beneath her.
None of us knows when the time is going to come that we will take our last breath on this earth.
I'd welcome your prayers if you don't think Carter and I are beyond hope. Ada smiled at her.
No one is beyond hope.
Good. I must talk to Liza, if you'll excuse me.
Very well. I might see you soon at the next family event if you show up.
She walked away from Ada, feeling a little bit like she'd been attacked. When she looked around for Liza, she was nowhere to be seen. Now all she wanted to do was get back home to Carter. She understood they had to keep their distance somewhat, but it didn't feel good. Then she saw Levi and couldn't resist saying something to him about the orchard. She had to. She walked over and caught his eye. "Hello, Levi." Chapter 19.
Florence.
Levi lowered his head, barely making eye contact.
If you ever need any advice about the orchard, I'm always willing to give you some.
Thank you for the offer, but I'm fine. He went to walk away, but Florence grabbed his arm. The harvest wasn't fine, though, was it? No one read the signs, and you can't just pick a date and do it on the same date every year. I believe the girls told you when they thought the harvest should have been done.
It's no business of yours any longer.
Florence wasn't deterred. She had to make him understand. The girls have been around the orchard long enough, and that's why they know more about running an orchard than you do. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but the harvest was a disaster.
God willed it.
Nay, you allowed it to happen. And you'll have to nag the girls daily to collect those windfall apples. If they're not collected every single day, it encourages pests. He nodded.
I had other things to think about this year. Once Wilma and I are man and fra, I will fully concentrate on the orchard above all else. Thank you for your concern."
He gave her a nod, and then he walked away. She closed her eyes, feeling she might faint.
"Are you okay, Florence?"
She opened her eyes to see Stephen. "I'm fine." She glanced at Levi heading away, and Stephen followed her gaze.
"I heard about what happened with the harvest. That must be pretty upsetting for you."
"It is. Very upsetting. But there's nothing I can do about it. I offered to give him my advice." She shrugged.
"Did you see who has just arrived?"
"Who?"
"Earl."
She couldn't wait to see him. "Thank you for telling me. Where is he?" He pointed into a crowd, and she saw Earl making his way towards her. She wanted to run to him, but she couldn't. Not with all those people around. He walked up and hugged her.
"Hello, Schwester."
"I've missed you. How long are you staying? Where are you staying?"
"I'm staying with Mark."
"Oh, really? No one said anything."
"I'm going back the day after tomorrow."
"So soon?" He nodded.
"Gotta get back to work."
"You're not staying for Wilma's wedding?" He frowned, and his lips twitched with disapproval.
"Nay."
"I'll have to show you the photos of our mother."
"I can't wait to see her. Will we also be able to visit our grandmother?"
"Yes, we can go tomorrow. I'll arrange it."
"Dinka."
He chuckled.
"I can't wait to meet her and see if she looks like Mom. I can't remember what Mom looked like too clearly, though, so the photos will be interesting."
"I don't remember her face at all. That's why I'm pleased to have photos." She decided to take the opportunity to ask him something she'd been wondering a long time. "Shall we sit over here?"
"Sure."
They sat down on a bench that was pushed to the side of the barn, along one wall. "I have a question. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. But why don't you get along with Wilma? Did she do something?"
"What makes you think she did something to me?"
"I just get the feeling that she might have done something. You can tell me. I won't tell anyone except for Carter, and he doesn't know anyone to tell anything to." He raised his eyebrows.
"Aw, you don't want to know about that."
"I do. I know you and Mark never really got along that well with her, and I just wonder why, if there's a reason."
That's not, well, there's not just one reason."
"What do you mean?" He pressed his lips together, and she could tell he was recalling something and mulling it over in his mind.
"She had a temper."
"I've never really seen it. Not a really bad one."
"She's done some things that weren't nice."
"To you?"
"Yeah."
"Don't hold back. Tell me."
"It can't hurt if you know, I suppose, now that you've left."
"That's right. She doesn't want to speak to me anymore. She invited me to this wedding at Joy's request, but she said she didn't want me at hers."
He nodded, as though he wasn't surprised. "When I was a young teenager, I used to do a lot of woodwork. Dot didn't want my tools to get mixed up with his, so he let me do my work in the stone cottage. It used to be on the property where you're living now. It was my special place."
"The one... it's not there anymore."
"I know. There's a story attached."
"Yeah, you were always so good at making things."
"I made toys for the girls. I had an argument with Wilma, and she had it destroyed, knocked down to the ground."
Florence was stunned. She felt sick to the stomach that Wilma had done that. He shook his head.
"She wanted to use it. I don't know why she wasn't happy about me using the place. It meant the girls couldn't play there because there would be tools around, I guess. Maybe that was it. She asked me to get my stuff out and clean it. I said Dot said I could work there."
"Why don't I remember this?"
"It was a conversation between me and her. I used to go there all the time. That's why I was hardly ever at home. I don't know if she wanted the girls to play in it or what. Maybe she wanted to rent it.
Before I used it, it was sitting there vacant for as long as I can remember.
I remember that. People used to stay in the cottage where I live now, visitors and such, but no one ever stayed in the little stone place. From what I remember, it was too small. It wasn't that small, but it was too small for somebody to live in.
It caused trouble between Wilma and Dot. I remember they had a few cross words about it. He said that he told me I could use it, and that was the end of it. Then, the next day when I went there, it was flattened. I picked through the rubble and got my tools.
What happened to it?
No one ever found out, but someone said they saw a tractor there and some sort of machine pushing it over. My guess is Wilma.
Wilma what? You think Wilma had someone pull it down?
I'm sure of it. There's no doubt in my mind.
She wondered if Wilma would be capable of such an act. Then she decided she might be. Does Mark know this?
He does. Wilma is fine until you cross her, and then the claws come out.
Florence thought about her own experience. She had always had to do the bulk of the work around the place because Wilma was often tired and sickly, or just mentally couldn't cope with anything. Had it all been just an act, so Florence would do all the work? So that's why you left after Dot died.
That's what pushed me over the edge. Sorry to leave you alone, but I had to get out of there. She liked you, so Mark and I knew you'd be okay.
Florence nodded. I was okay. I enjoyed the orchard.
Dot always knew you were the one who'd take over. I like my woodwork, and Mark is more of a businessman, and he's doing well with his saddlery business.
Yes. Thanks for telling me all that just now. Now, on a happier subject, I'll have Carter drive us to see our grandmother tomorrow. We'll collect you at around 9 in the morning. He smiled.
Has Mark met her?
She shook her head. No.
I'll talk with him and see if he'll come with us tomorrow.
He'll say no.
Chapter 20.
The wedding ceremony was soon underway, and Florence stood at the back with 5 other Englishers who'd come to the wedding. It didn't matter where she was. All that mattered was she was there to see Joy marry Isaac. 3 of her sisters had married wonderful men, and all were members of the Amish community. In a way, she envied them slightly. There hadn't been a man for her within their community. She wouldn't change things now. Carter was everything she'd wanted in a man, and everything she thought she'd never get. With the bishop's booming voice, Florence heard the long talk he gave, but when it came to everything else, she was too far away to hear. The ceremony was over too soon. During the meal afterward, Florence had a brief moment to congratulate Joy and Isaac before they were swamped with other well-wishers. Then she spent most of the time with Cherish, who mostly complained about Malachi. Then Florence heard herself agree to taking Cherish back to the farm the day after Wilma's wedding. Of course, she told Cherish. Carter will have to agree since I can't drive. He will. I'm sure he'll do anything you ask. Florence laughed. It was probably true. After Florence had said goodbye to everyone who was still speaking to her, she was ready to go. She walked away from the warm, enclosed annex, kept warm by gas heaters, and shivered in the cold evening air. Pulling her coat tighter around her, she noticed that Mark and Christina were leaving and hurried over. Could you please drive me home?
Sure, jump in.
It was a good wedding, wasn't it? Christina said. It sure was, and I'm so pleased I got to see Honor and Mercy. I might not see them again for a very long time. I guess they'll come back after the babies are born to see Wilma, but who knows when that will be. Oh, is Earl coming with you? Nay, he'll get a ride home later. Mark maneuvered the buggy out of the long line and headed down the driveway. You're not going to Wilma and Levi's wedding, are you? Christina asked. No, I was specifically told I couldn't go. Who said that? Christina asked. Wilma. At least she asked me to this one. We used to be so close. Now she's got it in her mind that I'm trying to ruin her life or something. Because of the orchard? Mark chuckled.
Don't get Florence talking about apples. That's true, Florence laughed. I could go on for hours. Just drop me here. That's okay. There's no need to go all the way up the driveway. I can't have you walking all that way in the dark, Mark said. Okay, thanks. She said goodbye and looked up at the house. The light coming from inside was a welcome sight, and she could hear Spot barking from within the house. She reached for the door handle, and Carter opened it. She collapsed into his arms. Hey, what's wrong? Did something bad happen? I had words with Levi, and he just disagreed and walked away. I felt so small. Then there was Ada. He walked her over and set her in front of the fire. What did Ada do? He asked as he covered her with a blanket. Basically, she told me I'm going to hell. Not in so many words. Because of me? Because I left. Don't let it upset you. We both knew this sort of thing was going to happen. She sniffed. I know, but I don't want to do anything to upset Wilma any more than she's already upset. She shouldn't be upset. She's getting married in a few days. She should be rejoicing and sending hallelujahs up. I'm guessing there wouldn't have been too many suitable men for her. I don't know. I don't think she was really looking to get married again. Now she has someone to help with all the work. Florence bit her lip. Maybe. I'll make you a hot drink to warm you. Dinka. And then I'll have an early night. I told Earl we'll take him to visit Betty tomorrow, if that's okay with you. Sure, I'm looking forward to meeting him. Florence snuggled down into the blanket and stared at the crackling fire. She knew this was where she... Chapter 21. When they arrived at Betty's old people's home, Carter stopped in the foyer. I'll just wait here. You two go in alone. You come in too. Betty asked to see you last time, Florence said. It's best I stay here. He sat down on a chair, and when Florence saw he had his mind made up, she and Earl approached the woman at the reception desk. When the woman looked up, Florence said, I'm here to see Betty Jones. Please take a seat, and someone will be with you in a moment. Instantly, Florence was concerned. The woman was clearly nervous. Was her grandmother ill? Had she been moved to the hospital? A few minutes later, someone walked out. Mrs. Braithwaite. Yes? Florence stood. I'm Camille Ames, the facility administrator. Would you mind coming with me? Sure. Florence collected Carter, and they all followed the woman into a smaller room. Please have a seat. Miss Ames then closed the door behind her, and rather than sitting down behind her desk, she walked in front of them and crouched down. I'm sorry to tell you, Betty passed away in her sleep last night. Florence was shocked and looked at Earl. She knew how disappointed he'd be. The last link to their mother was gone. I'm dreadfully sorry for your loss, she said. This is Earl, my brother. He never even met her. This was going to be the first time. I'm sorry. Last time you left, she did tell one of the nurses that she wanted you to have all her photographs. She walked over to the other side of the room, pulled something from a shelf, and then handed Florence a gray cardboard box. It was the same cardboard box she'd seen last time she was there. Thank you. That was nice of her. Will there be a funeral? Carter asked. Yes, I don't have the details yet. Would you mind calling us when you do? Certainly, she replied, while she reached for pen and paper. She took down Carter's phone number. Florence was pleased her husband could think clearly in a crisis. She was just sitting there in shock, not knowing what to do or what to say. Earl hadn't said a word. The funeral director's already collected her. That meant that Earl couldn't even see her if he'd wanted. Stay a while. I'll have someone make you tea. I think it's best we leave, Carter said. She didn't have any pain then? Florence asked. The woman smiled. Just drifted away in her sleep. Earl finally spoke. I guess that's good that she didn't have any pain. We can be pleased about that. Once they were back in the car, they went through all the photographs in the box before they drove away from the parking lot. I have some photos at home. Do you want to keep some of these photos of our mother? I'd like to keep this one. He picked up a photo. That's enough. Sure. Do you want to come back home with us for a while? No, thank you, Florence. I think I would just like to be by myself and get an early start in the morning back home. You're not going to Wilma's wedding, Earl? Asked Carter. Florence hadn't told him the story about why Earl and Wilma didn't get along. No, I'm heading back tomorrow. I wonder when the funeral will be. I do hope someone calls us. We don't have any of her relatives' phone numbers. Surely they will. We can always keep an eye out for the funeral announcements. I missed her by a day, Earl said from the back seat. Yeah, I'm sorry. Perhaps we could visit Mom and Dot's graves on the way home. I'd like that very much. Earl led the way as they walked along the rows of graves belonging to the Amish and Mennonites, while the cold wind was nipping at their faces. Florence always felt a sense of peace at the graveyard, but today she pondered serious questions. Where would she be buried? It seemed a long way off, but who knew what would happen? She and Carter hadn't even thought to talk about where they'd be buried. Before she left the community, she'd always known where her body would be laid to rest. But now this was one of the many things in her life that had changed. Now she wasn't a member of the community, and it felt a little strange. She still had hoped that Carter would join their community, but with Wilma acting so standoffish and her outright rejection of him, it had been made that much harder. At least he got along well with her two brothers, and he wouldn't admit it, but she was sure he was fond of Wilma's daughters, even though he still jokingly called them the Bonnet Sisters. Earl stopped. Here we are, right here. He pointed at the side-by-side graves, marked with simple wooden nameplates. She stood there looking at them, remembering the day her father died. Carter put his arm around her. I hope they approve of me, Carter said. Earl turned around with the glint of a tear in his eye. They would've. Florence was grateful that her two brothers approved of Carter, and she knew her parents would have, too. Chapter 22. A week later, Carter and Florence traveled 50 minutes away to Eagleton for Betty's funeral. They found the chapel at the very end of South Street and parked the car. I'm so glad you're here with me. She clutched his arm as he turned off the engine. He took hold of her hand and squeezed it. Of course I'd be here. You still haven't learned to drive. Oh, is that the reason? She laughed. I would never let you come alone to anything like this. Thank you for being so good to me. Thank you for being my wife. They shared a quick kiss. She looked at the chapel then and noticed there were only 2 cars parked outside. Are we early? He glanced at his wristwatch. It's just 15 minutes before it starts. Let's go in and see if we can meet the woman who called us. What was her name again? Tracy. Yes, that's right. When Carter and Florence walked into the chapel, a woman who appeared to be in her early 30s met them. You must be Florence. Florence smiled at her and assumed she was Tracy. That's right. And this is your husband, Carter? That's right. My grandmother talked about little else since your visit. I'm Tracy, and your mother would have been my aunt, so that makes us cousins. I'm so pleased to meet you. Your mother joined the Amish, is that right? She did. I grew up not even knowing that she hadn't been in our community all her life. She died when I was about 2. No one knew what happened to her. She just went missing one day. Granny said that after a while she preferred to think she was dead. I think that was the only way she could cope. The not knowing was dreadful for her. Yes, I can understand how it would have been. I don't know why she didn't let everyone know where she was. There was a lot of infighting and whatnot going on in the family at the time. You might have heard that my father is in prison for running over I should say our, grandfather. Yes, Betty did mention that. It was an accident. Some people in the family didn't see it that way.
She made a broad gesture with her hand toward all the empty seats. "As you can see by the lack of people here." Florence saw an elderly couple in the front row and 3 other individuals who were scattered around the room, sitting on their own. "Is this all that's coming?" "Seems so." "You were the one who looked after Betty?" Florence asked. "There was no one else. We were very close. She was so glad you came to see her. She died peacefully, finally knowing what had become of her only daughter." Tracy plucked a tissue out of her pocket, and she dabbed at the corners of her eyes. "I couldn't watch her all the time because I have my job, but she was happy where she was. I visited her every couple of days, and we'd sit and talk for hours." At that moment, a man in black robes and a white clerical collar appeared at the front of the chapel. "Excuse me," Tracy said to them. "I'll just have to go and talk to Father Monahan." "Certainly." "Let's sit," Carter whispered, setting a hand lightly on her arm. After they sat in the 3rd row from the front, Florence whispered, "This is quite sad that there are so few people here." "Sounds like a big family rift. But I wonder if it was a big family at all, or just a small family." "I can't remember her mentioning any other children. I think it was just my mother and her brother. But it is quite possible that Betty could have had many siblings, and then there would be many cousins." "We can find out about that later." "Sure." When organ music sounded, Florence looked up and noticed the closed white casket had been brought into the chapel. When the funeral service was over, Carter said, "Don't take this the wrong way, but I'd hesitate in getting too friendly with people here. It sounds like there's a lot of drama surrounding this family, the same as with your Bonnet sisters." "True. I don't want to get involved in that. But I want to find out about them. Not about them, but from them about my mother and my grandmother." He nodded. "Fair enough." They made their way to the aisle, and Tracy came back to them. "We're burying her at the little cemetery 5 miles down the road. Would you like to come?" "Yes, we would," Carter answered. "And then everyone's going back to my place for refreshments if you'd like to join us there, too." "Thank you, we'd like that," Florence said. At her house, Tracy started in talking about her father. He tried to get out to go to his mother's funeral, but he wasn't allowed. Sometimes they do let people out for compassionate purposes. I have no idea why they refused him. Florence wondered if he was as innocent as everybody was saying he was, if it was so easy for others to get out for funerals, but not him. "You did hear what happened, didn't you?" Tracy asked. "He accidentally drove over your grandfather in the driveway?" "That's right. They always got along so well, so I don't know why the police came to the conclusion that it was murder. Well, to be fair, it wasn't the police. It was the jury. And they are completely unqualified people. They didn't even know my father." "Very sorry to hear about that." "Thanks, Florence. Would you visit him?" Florence nearly choked. She didn't know what to say, and suddenly regretted coming to the funeral. Carter stepped in. "She's always had a fear of jails, so I'm sorry that wouldn't be possible." "I can understand that. No one likes it, but after a time or two there, it would be just like going down to the corner store." "Oh, really?" Carter said, and Florence was sure he was going to add something. "I'm sorry. As Carter said, I do have a fear of going to a lot of places, and that might be because of my Amish upbringing. I've only just left, you know." "Is that right? I didn't know that. From what Betty said, I thought you had got out a long time ago." Carter shook his head. "No, she was only released into my custody recently." Tracy looked at him and then burst out laughing. "Okay, I can see you're a comedian. You and I are going to get along well. You haven't got drinks. Wait here, I'll get you some." When she left, Carter whispered, "We've got to get out of here fast." "How are we going to do that? She's going to get us drinks. And I hope she doesn't mean anything alcoholic. Alcohol has always made me sick, and I don't want to upset her in any way since she's my cousin, and I've only just met her." "It's a tricky situation.
I'm starting to think me not having any family is a good thing.
We'll have to think of something.
One drink and we'll leave. I'll make sure it's soda.
She waited while Carter walked over to Tracy, who'd just picked up the champagne bottle. He said something to her, and she nodded and pulled out 2 glasses of orange juice. While she was busy talking to other people, Carter picked up the orange juices and headed back to Florence.
Drink up. This is a celebration. After all, it is your stepmother's wedding day as well.
That's right. I completely forgot. And the celebrations would still be ongoing.
And we mustn't be late.
Florence frowned at Carter. We can't go.
We aren't, but they don't know that.
She raised her eyebrows.
Don't worry. I'll do the lying.
When Tracy made her way back, Carter explained that they needed to leave because it was also Florence's stepmother's wedding day. She thanked them for coming, and they said their goodbyes. When Florence got into the car, Tracy knocked on the window. When Florence lowered it, she stuck her head in and said, "Think about visiting my father. I'll come with you, and we can make a day of it." "I'll see." "Good. And if not, we really should go do lunch sometime, you and I, Florence." "That would be nice." "I'll call you." "Okay." Tracy stood there waving until they drove away.
They were a weird bunch, Carter said.
They weren't so bad, but I didn't feel I fitted in with them. I felt a connection to Betty, though.
Trust me, they were weird.
She stared at him. Weirder than the Bonnet Sisters? He glanced over at her.
The Bonnet Sisters are entertaining. What you see is what you get with them. I've kind of got a creepy, uneasy feeling about the people we met today. No wonder your mother left.
Florence nodded. I was thinking exactly the same thing. But Betty was lovely.
Yes, she was. Remember what your mother wrote in that letter to you? You thought it meant to spend more time with family.
I'm sure she meant the Baker family.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
They both laughed. Chapter 23. Earlier that morning, Joy had been first to wake in the Baker household. She crept down the stairs to tend to the fire. As she encouraged the flames by putting more kindling on and then adding another log, she remembered that Florence had always been the one to do that. It hadn't been the same home without Florence. Isaac and she had arrived back the night before, after a few days away. Her mother's wedding still impacted her, even though she'd managed to avoid the double wedding. Every other Amish married couple spent their first 2 newlywed weeks, or more, visiting their relatives and friends, but with Wilma's wedding a week after her own, she couldn't even do that. Fortunately, her sisters had made things easier by insisting they would do her after-wedding cleanup, leaving her extra time for visiting. She couldn't get past the fact that it was her mother's second wedding, so why couldn't she have waited until the new year? Was she frightened that Levi would have changed his mind, given more time? Joy stood up and warmed her back by the fire for a few minutes before she headed to the kitchen to boil the water for coffee. Even though she was annoyed with her mother, when they got back from their few days away, they threw themselves into helping for the wedding. Joy secretly thought that her mother had never been in love with Levi, but had merely latched on to him in a panic when Florence left the household. The only good thing about Wilma's wedding was that it gave her more time to spend with Honor and Mercy before they went home. As Joy put the kettle on the stove for the first time that day, Cherish walked into the room followed by her dog, Caramel, and Joy's dog, Goldie. She let them outside and then sat down at the kitchen table. It was still dark outside, but soon the men with the church benches would be back to set up the place for wedding number 2. "We're going to have to put the dogs somewhere where they won't make a nuisance of themselves like they did for my wedding." "I'll put them back in my room." Cherish glanced over at the stove. "You making coffee?" "Yeah, I'll get you a cup." "Dinka, I guess Levi's going to be staying in this house from tonight." It was a depressing thought. "I don't know, I guess so. I haven't really thought that far. He must be. Where else would he go?" Cherish sighed. "It's all right for you. You can move out any time, but I'm stuck here."
Joy put a finger up to her mouth, telling her to be quiet.
You better be careful what you say. Mom will be awake any time now.
Cherish rolled her eyes.
She's making a big mistake. You can't say that. It might work out all right. It's a big day, and I'm not prepared for it. We've just had your wedding a few days ago.
Don't get me started on that, Joy said. Cherish smiled, pleased that the scripture-quoting Joy wasn't as perfect as she liked to make out. She was clearly annoyed at their mother, as were all the girls. It made no sense to bring Levi into the family. They were fine without him. That might have worked if they were 2 or 3 years old, but not when they were fully grown women. And she wasn't sure how things were going to go with Bliss living in the house. Ada was Mom's attendant for the wedding, and the girls weren't even allowed in her room. Cherish wasn't happy about that, and soon lost interest altogether. If she borrowed someone's buggy and went somewhere else for the day, no one would even know she was missing. The only problem with that idea was the ramifications if someone did find out. Now it wasn't just dealing with her mother's punishment. She'd have to face Levi. She would not give him the satisfaction of doling out a punishment for her. After the uneventful ceremony when her mother married Levi, Cherish was further disgusted when she was forced to join the women in the kitchen to help with the food. After 3/4 of an hour, she escaped when no one was looking and merged with the crowd. She looked around for someone interesting to speak with. Weddings were a great way to meet people, and there were people here who hadn't been at her sister's wedding. As her gaze traveled over the crowd, she nearly fell off her chair when she spied someone familiar. He was tall and lanky, and reaching his long arms to get food over at the other side of the table.
What's he doing here? She thought. He should be back at the farm instead of enjoying himself at a wedding.
Fury rose within her, and she marched over, grabbed him by his arm, and swung him around. She was just about to give him a piece of her mind when she had to step back in shock.
You're not Malachi.
His face was completely different.
Oh, I'm sorry, she said as she jumped back. I thought you were someone else.
Not one of your friends, I hope, if that's how you treat them.
No, not a friend. Not a friend at all.
He wasn't smiling. Clearly, he hadn't taken kindly to being pulled about by a stranger. She backed away, and the man went back to piling food on his plate. She spotted Favor eating by herself and hurried over to sit with her.
What's wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost, said Favor. I sort of did. I thought I saw Malachi. I just made a fool of myself. Malachi from the farm? Yeah. See that man over there? She asked as she pointed him out. He looks exactly like Malachi, except he's not so old. Interesting. She looked back at Cherish. Why do you look so shaken? I just pulled on his arm because I was annoyed with him for not being at the farm.
Favor burst out laughing.
Don't worry. You will be seeing him soon enough. Aren't you going back there tomorrow?
Cherish's eyebrows flew up.
It's not like that. I know what you're thinking. I don't like him at all. I just want him to do a good job. You should have a good idea by now if you're happy with him or not. Takes a while. Come on, let's take your mind off Malachi and talk to some new people. Yeah, or talk to people we haven't seen since Joy's wedding.
Favor giggled.
That's right, last week.
Both girls exchanged smiles before they walked into the crowd. Chapter 24. Carter wasn't happy when he and Florence collected Cherish at 5 o'clock in the morning, and she had a box of chickens in her arms.
They're better than me bringing caramel. At least the chickens won't scratch your nice leather seats.
Fine. She remembered that Carter didn't like her talking, so she put her head back and closed her eyes. The wedding had been exhausting. With the huge cleanup, she hadn't gotten to bed until 11 last night. It wasn't long before she dozed off. "Wake up, Cherish," Florence said. She opened her eyes and saw they were at the farm already. Now she'd have a good time. She patted her box of chickens. Soon she'd find out if his story was true or if he just didn't want those chickens for reasons of his own. He had told her he was scared of chickens, had a phobia. He was probably lying. "Are you getting out?" Carter said, looking around at her.
Don't say anything to him about the chickens. Can we leave them in the car for a minute, Carter? I'll come back in a minute with Malachi.
"Suit yourself. I'll leave the car door open and unlocked."
Of course. Why wouldn't you leave it unlocked? Nothing gets stolen out here,
Cherish giggled. Force of habit for a city person. After they greeted Malachi on the porch, Cherish pulled Malachi aside.
Do you mind if they make themselves a cup of coffee or something? I have something to show you.
"Yeah, that's fine. What is it?"
It's a surprise. Come on. It's waiting in the car.
On the short walk to the car, she spied the old chicken coop, which he'd promised to leave intact. "I can't believe you brought a surprise for me. I thought you didn't like me."
Of course I like you, or you wouldn't be my caretaker.
She tried her best to keep up with his long strides. "I thought there might be many reasons for choosing me." Glancing up as she walked, she asked,
Like what?
"Maybe because you couldn't find anyone else." That was exactly right, but she didn't want him to know that.
Oh, don't be silly.
She smiled at him and slapped him playfully on his arm. He grinned back at her, rubbing his arm and pretending to be wounded. When they got to the car, she said,
It's in there.
He looked in the car. "Eh? You brought me a cardboard box?"
Look inside.
Cherish held her breath as he opened the box. He hollered and jumped back, and then tripped over his big feet and ended up on the ground. Then he scrambled to his feet so fast he fell over again. Cherish laughed so hard her stomach hurt. She doubled over and laughed so hard she could no longer stand. She fell on the ground laughing. He pressed his hands onto his hips. "It's not funny. What would you do that for? I told you how I don't like chickens." She sat up when her laughing slowed. When she could talk, she said,
I'm sorry, but you should have seen your face. I've never seen you move so fast.
"Is that so? What are you scared of?"
I wouldn't be silly enough to tell you.
"You're probably the type of woman who's not scared of nothing."
That's right. I'm fearless. But seriously, how can you be scared of such little baby chickens? Let me get one out now and show you.
"No, don't." She giggled again, and then moved in front of him and plucked a chicken out and held it closer.
There. Don't you just love it? Isn't it sweet?
She held the fluffy yellow chicken up to the side of her face. "It's terrifying." He looked away.
You're serious, aren't you?
"It's not something I would lie about."
Hold one.
She thrust it out to him. He took a step back. "No way! You'll have to take them back home with you. You can't leave them here."
Of course I won't. You'll get used to them.
"I will never get used to them. You might not understand it, but I can barely look at them." Now that she saw he was serious, she almost felt sorry for him.
Okay, I'll take them with me. Or I'll see if Ruth wants them.
"Ruth from next door?"
Do you know another Ruth that we both know?
"She's a gossip. She comes here nearly every other day and asks me what's been going on. I tell her the same thing. Nothing's been going on. Why is she so nosy?"
I'm guessing she's just protective of Dagmar's farm.
"I don't see why everyone thinks I'm not doing a good job." She raised her eyebrows as she patted the chicken.
Everyone?
"You and Ruth."
My sister thinks you're doing a good job.
"Good. That's at least someone."
And I do too.
He stared at her, avoiding looking at the chicken. "Really?"
I think so, from what I can see. You'll have to show me the rest of the farm.
"Now?
Yes, now.
Don't you want to rest after driving all that way?"
No, I was asleep all the way. So show me this marvelous work you've been doing.
"Follow me. You can put the chicken back in the box, can't you?"
Sure.
By the time Cherish had been shown over the farm, she had to admit he wasn't doing an awful job of things. The only unpleasantness was the cheese he insisted upon making. The goat cheese with the awful smell.
I hope you aren't making too much of that smelly cheese because it really stinks. I make it every day. You have to make it on the day of milking. You see, she blocked her ears. I can't smell it and I can't hear about it. I don't want anything to do with it. It's turned me off all cheeses for the rest of my life. That's too bad. It's one of my favorite foods, and I had hoped we can add that to all the other things we have in common. She dropped her hands by her sides. We have nothing in common. Oh, you heard me. Putting your hands over your ears didn't help much, did it? You're impossible. Thanks. It's not. Grr. She growled at him and walked away. Chapter 25. The next day, Cherish helped with the morning chores, and when they were done, they sat down behind the barn that shielded them from a chilly breeze, while the sun warmed them. I made this seat, he said, patting it. She looked at it. You did a good job. She gave a loud sigh when she thought about going home. Levi and Bliss would have moved in, and it would never be the same. One day I'm going to come back here and live. I can't wait. I'm so grateful to Dagmar. She and I understood one another. She must have been an unusual person to have understood you. A giggle escaped her lips. She couldn't argue with that. I can't wait to get away from my mother. She's married now. Got married the day before I came here. She stared into the distance. Ever since she agreed to marry him, she's been acting like a whole different person. The whole thing's totally depressing. Have they known each other long? Long enough. She frowned at him. What does that have to do with anything? Dunno. It was just a question. She looked up to the sky. If only I was older. I could move here and get away and be by myself. I feel old enough. I don't see why people can boss me about. I'm mature enough to live on my own. It's not as though it's hard. She looked back at him. Is it hard? There's always emancipation. Pardon me? A mental patient? He laughed. I don't think you're that bad. I said emancipation. She stared at him blankly. It's where you separate yourself from your parents, or in this case, parent, and you're legally allowed to live by yourself and do things as though you were over 18. She bit into her thumbnail. He wasn't as dumb as she first thought. That's the answer. And how do I go about making this happen? I'm pretty sure it's just a matter of signing some legal documents. I'm not sure if you can do it in this state, but I have heard of it being done elsewhere. Each state has differing laws. She drew her eyebrows together. You shouldn't have mentioned it then. You got my hopes up. Yeah, best to forget it. Your mother won't be too happy with me, and she might complain to Uncle Zachariah. His uncle was the bishop in the local community. Who cares about her? She doesn't care about me anymore. She told me once that I could go to hell and she wouldn't care. What do you think of that? That's harsh. I know. She nodded, feeling good to talk to someone other than one of her sisters. He grinned. Especially since you're an easy person to get along with. Exactly. There's that lawyer that I signed the ownership papers for this place with. I could stop by his office and talk to him about it. You could. Or you could just wait until you're old enough. Follow the path of least resistance. I've always found that the best. Is that what you do with your life? He smiled at her. Pretty much. You might want to just get your mother's permission to move out. That would be a whole lot easier. You just don't want to get into trouble. You guessed it. And if you upset your mother, how would my uncle feel about that since you're going to live here? Good point. She sighed again. Maybe you have the right idea after all. Don't do anything and just see what happens. Hey, it's not as if I don't do nothing. I work from sunup to sundown. And so you should. But I don't see you working now. I'm entertaining my guest. My very important guest. That's true. She giggled. I'll let you off this time. I suppose you're going to see Ruth from next door before you go home tomorrow? Yes. She'll tell me what's going on around here. Like Annie Wiley visiting.
What's wrong with Annie visiting me?
It's hardly proper, is it?
What are you talking about?
You have a young lady here when there's no one about?
She shook her head in disgust. Annie is me cousin on me mother's side.
First cousin?
Yeah, first cousin. She tried to remember if she'd already been told that. Maybe she knew that once. She couldn't quite recall.
Why didn't you just say that?
I didn't know I had to say anything about it. She stared at him. He wasn't handsome, but there was something about him that was growing on her.
Do you like the baby chickens?
No, I don't. That was mean of you.
It wasn't. I thought you'd see how sweet and cute they are, and you could get used to them, and you'd lose your fear.
Thanks. That was thoughtful, I suppose. Cherish felt good sitting here talking nonsense to Malachi. Maybe it was because he was someone different to talk to. Or maybe it was because she was just happy to be back on Aunt Dagmar's farm. She stood up and clapped her hands.
Okay, that's enough of a break. Let's keep working. Just do what you normally do today, and I'll follow you around to make sure you're doing everything correctly.
That wasn't the deal when I took the job. I didn't know I'd have anyone looking over me shoulder.
I just want to make sure everything is running smoothly.
He stood up, towering over her. You're a control freak and bossy.
No one's ever called me that before.
He rubbed his chin. Yes, but I have called you spoiled.
Everyone says that, but I'm not. My mother wants me out of her life, and now my new stepsister has got the second best room in the house. I resent her already.
He burst out laughing at her, then said, What if your mutter has more bobblies? Horror trembled through Cherish's body.
Oh, don't even say that. Don't even think it.
She slapped him on his shoulder.
That would be just awful. Why do you have to say horrible things like that?
Dunno, just saying. He rubbed his shoulder where she had slapped him. You've got some muscles on you.
Yes, I have some very strong muscles.
She pulled up her sleeve and flexed her muscles. He poked her bicep with his fingers. Very hard. I'll have to have you moving feed sacks round the barn. She made a face.
That doesn't sound like much fun.
Not everything's fun, but things have to be done.
What do you do in your spare time around here? Do you get lonely by yourself?
Nah, never. I like the peace and quiet here by myself. As for spare time, I didn't think I was allowed to have any. She giggled.
That's true.
Sometimes I go to dinner at me uncle's house.
Is anyone trying to get you married?
Nah, I don't think so. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his nearly shoulder-length hair.
When you go there for a meal, do they invite girls you don't know?
Sometimes. She hit him hard on his shoulder again. He frowned at her. What was that for?
Are you really that stupid?
He laughed. I see. Yeah, I must be. Chapter 26. The visit to the farm ended too soon. Cherish ended up giving the chickens to Ruth next door, who was grateful for them. As they drove away from the farm, Cherish felt a deep sense of sadness. She was leaving bright and sunny to go back to depressing and gloomy.
Thanks so much for driving me again, Carter.
My pleasure. We enjoy it at the farm, don't we, Florence?
We do.
I can see why you like it, Cherish.
I won't talk as much this time on the way home.
He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Is that even possible unless you fall asleep?
All I can do is try. And thanks for letting me bring the chickens.
Cherish dreaded going home. At least her work in the coffee shop got her out of the house for a couple of days a week. You're welcome. I'm pleased you were able to find them a good home.
Me too. I never asked you, Carter, but what was my Aunt Iris like?
She was an amazing person. Kind and loving, supportive. The best mother in the world.
That's so nice. If I ever get to be a mother, I want someone to say that about me. You'll be a wunderbar Mutter, Florence.
Thanks, Cherish. I hope to be.
Tell me more about Iris, please, Carter.
Carter told Cherish a few more things about his adoptive mother, and when Cherish made no comment, Carter looked in the rearview mirror to see Cherish fast asleep. A little over a week later, it was Christmas Day. Florence and Carter woke to gently falling snow. This was her first Christmas away from the Baker home. There would be none of their usual traditions, such as second Christmas and all the food that went with it. No excited giggles and squeals as her sisters made their favorite Christmas sweets. But all that was made up for by being with the man she loved with all her heart. Sometimes she felt like she was living in a dream, and she certainly didn't want to wake up if it was a dream. Carter had made her sit in front of the fire while he cooked a special breakfast for two. The man who once could only press buttons on a microwave was suddenly enjoying learning to cook. After a lifetime of looking after others, Florence felt very spoiled and loved. She sat on the couch with her legs curled up beside her, a crocheted throw over her knees, with Spot resting his head in her lap. This is the life, Spot. You're going to have to go out there sometime this morning and brave the cold. It won't take long, and then you can come back in front of the fire. He raised his head and looked at her. You do have to go out, she repeated. It's ready, Carter called out. Coming. She pushed Spot out the door, and he relented, quickly doing what he had to do, and then running back inside. When she went into the kitchen, she saw a big breakfast of bacon, eggs, and hash browns, and a steaming mug of her favorite vanilla-flavored coffee. I am getting spoiled today. You deserve it, Florence. I don't know what would have become of me if you hadn't come along. Florence put her hand over her mouth and giggled. Well, I don't know what I would have done, especially now that Wilma has married Levi. You saved me. You would have had to move out by yourself somewhere. She shook her head as she warmed her hands around the hot mug. And argued day and night with him about the orchard? I don't think so. I really don't know what I would have done, and I don't even want to think about it. Today's a happy day. I'm grateful for you. He smiled at her, leaned over, and kissed her. Then he settled down in the chair next to her. Today we'll only think about happy things. That suits me fine. She said her silent prayer of thanks for the food and then tucked in. It had taken her months to find the exact right present for Carter, and she hoped she'd got it right. When she had finished the food, she said, I know we said we wouldn't give each other gifts. Oh, no. I trusted you. He put his fork and knife down. I thought you really meant it. Tell me you didn't get me something. Well, I would have given it to you anyway, and it's not specifically something for Christmas. What is it? He looked about him and then looked under the table. Where is it? In here. She patted her midsection. His jaw dropped, and he stared at her. Wait a minute. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Don't fool with me. We're having a baby. He stood up and ran a hand over his cropped hair. I can't believe this is happening. This fast? Well, it doesn't take long. I didn't plan for it to happen this fast. I thought we'd be alone for a while. He walked around holding his head, and she was worried he wasn't happy about it. She couldn't tell whether he was delighted or delightedly horrified. Do you mind? Carter, talk to me. She froze in her chair. Mind? This is the best news I've had ever, in my whole life. Florence was relieved. You had me worried for a moment. He grabbed her face with both hands and then gave her a long, passionate kiss. Thank you, Florence. Thank you. She saw tears welling in his eyes. You don't know what this means. How much this... So when... What time? Late July. And when did you find out? Only yesterday. I had it confirmed. And you waited this long to tell me? I thought it would be a good present. It is. It's the best present anyone could have given me. It'll take me a while to get used to the idea. He looked around. The house, is it big enough? We could always build on or move out. We could leave this cottage here and build closer to the road. How does that sound? Build a much better, bigger place. I think we've got enough work with the orchards, don't you? This cottage will do us nicely for a very long time. He sat down next to her and held her hand. Whatever you say, whatever makes you happy. She looked into his eyes and knew how blessed she was to have him. I knew from the first time I saw you driving past in the buggy, there was just something about you, Florence. I was in love with you from that very day. And I had no idea. He put his arm around her, and she rested her head on his shoulder. Her life was close to perfect, but her heart went out to Cherish. She had looked so vulnerable when they left her at Wilma's house. Even though Cherish hadn't said anything, Florence knew she was apprehensive about living in the family home with her new stepfather. How happy she was to be a safe distance away and in Carter's arms. This has been Missing Florence, the Amish Bonnet Sisters, Book 7. Written by Samantha Price. Narrated by Stephanie Dillard. Copyright 2019 by Samantha Price. Production copyright 2020 by Samantha Price.